Okay, hello everyone. And due to what looks to be the latency between OBS and YouTube, you've caught me mid-coughing fit, which is a lovely thing for you all to see. Do let me know in the chat if you can hear me, and of course we've got Chris Meyer of Learning Modular. How are you, Chris?
Doing really good.
Kim Bjorn of Patch and Tweak, partner in crime with Chris. How are you, Kim?
Fine, thanks. Fine, thanks.
Please let me know. Yes, we can hear Chris, Kim, and Ben in the chat. Would be super helpful for latency that we've got between the stream that we see on YouTube, and it's all completely new tech for us, so it'll be fun either way. But these streams, they were born. Maybe you can tell us the initial idea, Chris, out of a very long potential stream.
I decided to rebuild my Monster frame. I started with an ADDAC Monster frame as my main studio case. And after doing a bunch of research into power, I said, I should put my money and my fingers where my mouth is, and rebuild the power inside my studio case. And that's been a long odyssey story, and we'll touch on briefly later on. But now I have to put 115 modules back into it. And since everyone's streaming during stay at home and things like that, we started tossing ideas here. Maybe I should just do it as a time lapse to see this massive thing going on. Then I remembered YouTube streams of like cats sleeping or goldfish bowls were very popular. So I think I was just doing it as a silent live stream for 8 hours while I did it. But then we had the mad idea maybe actually including some content with it. So the idea is why this module over that module? Why is it going there instead of somewhere else in the case? And rather than just hearing my opinion, I wanted you to hear some of my closely trusted friends as well. So the idea that's where this whole stream came from. I'm going to be reassembling my studio modular, discussing why I've chosen this particular set of modules, while both Ben and Kim chime in with their particular favorites. We'll have some good discussion.
Live chat, thank you. I can see a big stream of crazy echo. Have either of you got speakers on? Chris or Kim, have you got speakers on anywhere, or can you go into you're in headphones, Kim?
I have speakers on, but I've turned it down quite a bit now. See if that helps.
I actually muted my stuff, and I have muted my YouTube, so shouldn't be from here.
Yeah, keep letting me know, chat. There is a delay between us, so if you're frustratingly keyboard warrior in a way, there's a big. Someone said it's a forehead tape echo. That's quite nice. At least you're a decent. Please do let us know. It'll be a while before we see it compared to what we hear and vice versa. Chris is the man roaming around the room around the Monster case, so headphones may be a bit restrictive. Okay, my audio is low. Let me bump me up.
Yeah, it might have been me. I had my speaker. Speaker turned up on my Mac. Hopefully that's turned up a little bit here. Hopefully that's easier to manage now.
This is really useful. Thank you to everyone that's watching and letting us know. I will consult an OBS wizard if I'm still only on the left. So, yeah, it looks like I'm only on the left-hand side. Now, just to run through my setup, someone may know way more than us about this. I'm coming into my interface on channel 1 with my microphone, completely panned down the center on the interface, and I've simply set this audio interface as my input on OBS. I can't select channels in OBS, so maybe it's because I'm a mono feed as opposed to stereo. It's expecting a kind of left and right maybe, and it's not getting a left and right. I can't split my microphone. I don't have a splitter cable, so we might have to live with this, unfortunately, and something for next time. But again, do let me know. So the idea of the stream was to split this whole big epic challenge of Chris filling this monster system into bite-sized chunks and then dissect into, manageable content that we can all kind of partake in and take away from. Now, it might be a nice time to move over to this large system of Chris's.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and take me off screen? While I go ahead and change my camera?
So this is the system, part of the system, I should say. I will move around a little bit just so you can see the whole thing. We go up to the top corners, and we'll link all this in the YouTube description afterwards as well. So this is a Monster ADDAC case. We're going to look at notes and trigger generation today, but start with power. You've had well, I would say no small amount of issues, but you've been chasing quiet, useful power somewhat endlessly for a while now. So let's check in with Chris and just check on the case.
So here's the case. Been rebuilt recently. And I've rebuilt it with these huge linear power supplies. Genus Moto Lives, Lompian's bus boards, and a bus bar system. And where this came out of is the noise down in my system as low as I could. And I started by testing a whole bunch of different bus boards. And I'll be completely honest with you. I tested a whole bunch of boards. And I did not want the Genus Moto because they're not cheap. But and also they're a little bit on the small side. This whole monster frame is 1 meter wide. Even with two boards across, I'm going to have some long cable runs to get some things connected. So there's some other solutions I was rooting for to win. When I did a bunch of noise tests, the Genus Moto kept coming out quiet. I said, okay. I'm going to spend about $2,000 US on power system here. But if you look at modular grid, it's supposed to be worth about $30,000 altogether, which just staggers me to think about. Thank God I've been buying it over the course of 5 years. So it's worth going for the good power. But then I had to learn a lot about to get this done right. Because this is a complete DIY build. One of the few things remaining from the original case is the power inlet. I learned little intricacies, the difference between live, ground, and neutral. And actually, it's very important to keep those things straight when you're wiring your own system together from scratch like I am here. Because the fuse is on the live side. And if you put the fuse on the ground side, if you blow the fuse, it means that you have no more protection. You're probably going to fry yourself. So I had to really follow my wiring carefully throughout this entire system. Make sure I hooked up the live and neutrals correctly. But something else I discovered when playing around with power was these power supplies. These big ones, these big linear Copian gold boxes, or even the little meanwhiles you're using for your portable case, or the meanwhile cages that go inside these systems. They all separate the ground from your mains end from the ground on the power outside. And they do that so you can do tricks like I'm running this power supply backwards. It's 12 goes to my ground, and what's its normal reference zero to the minus 12 lead up. So I can go ahead and have minus 12 out of this power supply. Ultimately, you do want to connect the ground on your DC side back to the ground on your AC side. They're all supposed to be tied together. And most power systems I have found leave it floating. And that alone causes extra noise and hum. If I just grounded the rails in the system with the old power supply to where my mixer was, the noise level went down. That was one big change.
Okay, so we're at a point, Chris, there's several people. I appreciate the urgency and the dramaticness of it. But there's a lot of people saying they're abandoning this altogether because it's so bad. I'm trying to figure things out. What's difficult is I'm typing into the live chat, and what you're seeing is 20 seconds to a minute behind what I'm looking at. It seems I've fixed it. There's a mad flurry of thank gods. In the let me pull the I'm going to pull the chat in. You can see us all, our panicked faces and yourselves in the live chat. I'm not sure exactly what it was, truth be told, because of the buffer between us and the amount of things I'm muting, unmuting, closing, trying to change in OBS live as we go. But if it's fixed, we'll rely on you just to tell us when it's really bad. I've got the chat window open, as has Kim, so do let us know. And yes, good point, Benjamin, in the chat. We will start from the beginning effectively. We'll go back to the start of the system.
Okay.
Although someone did say that it is absolutely sample heaven, I appreciate that. You are absolutely welcome to mine this for sample fodder. You're total, as far as I'm concerned, do as you wish. Tag us in anything creative you do with it. So, Chris, we'll go back to the full screen of the case again. This is your huge case, new power system. We're looking at note and trigger generators in the stream today. Let's go back to the top and start from there.
Okay. So the reason I took this apart in the first place is the ADDAC Monster frame does come with actually pretty good power. It comes with what's called a hybrid supply, where there's switching power supplies that are a bit noisy to take it down to 15 volts. And then there's linear regulator boards which are quieter, which takes it down to 12 volts. And it was a pretty good system. But for the sake of my patrons and for my own interest, I really got into testing noise in modular systems to see how to get rid of noise. Because I've encountered a lot of people who have a lot of trouble with noise when they're trying to record their modular. So I tested a whole bunch of bus boards, and as fate would have it, let's say the least inexpensive, the most expensive board ended up being the one that performed the best, the Genus Modu Lib, the low impedance bus board.
You get what you pay for then, so that's okay at least.
Pretty much so. And I wanted there to be a cheaper solution, and I wanted there to be a more ergonomic solution. This case is 1 meter wide. So 2 bus boards don't even really go across the width of this case. And that meant I was going to be looking at some pretty long cable runs in some cases. But these were just simply the quietest boards. So that was the foundation of it. Another foundation was going with big linear power supplies. Linear is literally, well, these particular power supplies, a Copian Goldbox A series, literally have 1/500th the amount of noise as a mean well switching power supply.
It's a hell of a difference.
Yeah, it's a pretty huge difference to begin with. And I tried some other power supplies in here before. I had some Bell Power 1 supplies in here. They're excellent power supplies, but I had some startup problems with the case where all the capacitors that are on these individual bus boards to cut the noise down, and all the capacitors that are in some of my modules to cut their own noise down, required a huge surge of current, like an additional couple of amps on power up. And the power suppliers are going, this is too much, I'm out of here. So I had to go put massive power supplies in here. I now have a 9 amp power supply feeding my -12, and a 17 amp power supply feeding my +12 in this case.
It's crazy, but, well, we'll see, because this hasn't been filled and pulled entirely for the benefit of the stream. This is genuinely the...
No, you're going to experience all the trials and tribulations and the tears that I am during this process. But I had to learn a lot of things while wiring this thing up. Like, I really had to watch things like what was ground, what was live on the AC inlets. The fuse goes on the live. Most power supplies, these linear power supplies here, the laptop bricks that you use to power up your mobile case, the switching power supplies that go into cases like the Meanwell, they separate the ground on the AC side from the ground on the DC output. And that's so you can do funny things like I have this supply wired in backwards, where it's +12 is actually going to my ground bus, because I want to use what's 0 on this to feed the -12 bus in this system. So I had to have isolation between the input and output on it. But at the end of the day, you really want to tie the ground for your DC power to the ground for your AC connection. 1, it's safer in case something shorts out. But 2, that will lower the noise in your system. And even this system in its original configuration had a little bit of noise in it, but as soon as I ran a ground strap from these rails to the mounting rails for my mixer, the noise level went down. So there alone is just one tip to improve the noise in your system.
Just while we break in at that point, can we just test the 3 of us for level? I think we're somewhat more even. I am still hard left. I can't find anything to do with that. I do apologise. But if people can comment on the volume of the 3 of us, so if Kim, could you just speak briefly? Maybe tell us what you've done today.
I can try. I've actually been out in the nature today. It's great to be back in the modular setting. I hope I'm not doing the feedback thing now, but we'll see how this goes.
And then I've just muted Kim as he's finished, and then back to Chris again. If people could comment between the 3 of us relative how that sounds.
Yeah, hopefully we're doing pretty well here level-wise.
Yeah, so sorry, Chris, can you just reiterate that last point about the tip for reducing noise in a system?
Yeah, no problem. I found that, it's a design necessity that the power supplies that we use have their input ground on the AC side separated from their output ground on the DC side. And you need to do that so you can wire one backwards to be your -12 feet, things like that. But at the end of the day, all these green wires are the ground bus in my system. The DC ground eventually needs to get reconnected to the ground on your AC, on your mains, that center prong on your plug. It's safer, but also in this system, in its original configuration, it had a little bit of noise until I ran a ground strap just from my module mounting rails to the mounting rails for my mixer, and it killed off the last bit of noise in the system in its original configuration. And that's not the stock configuration of virtually any modular case. So that's something really worth doing, is making sure you've run a ground somehow from your case to your mains. That'll reduce the noise level right there.
I've seen it done before, and it makes sense, but I've also seen people just mention that there's no need to actually wire anything to the rails at all. That's come up a few times. But you're saying the opposite has been true in practice.
Well, there's no need. It'll work.
But it's also not going to hurt anything, so there's no reason not to.
It's not going to hurt anything unless you have a catastrophic failure somewhere in your system, and which could put power out to the module faces. And if that's not grounded, then it's going to go to you when you touch it.
Okay.
Now, that sort of failure is extraordinarily rare, but, you know, do you want to roll those dice?
No. Just for one final time, I appreciate that not everybody did abandon. Someone has said, can Kim talk again? So I'm going to unmute you, Kim. Can you?
Kim's actually a mute. It's a synthetic voice. It's not really him.
I can say something. But I'll say that I have only my Skype window open, and I suspect it must be something in OBS.
Yeah,
as it's not internal in any way.
Right. So that is Kim open and closed again. I've just muted Kim. So let's see where we go. Do please keep letting me know in the chat. It's super helpful.
Yeah. Hopefully we got the echo problem solved now.
So keep us coming with these power tips and noise tips, because noise is definitely an issue that is prevalent, I would say, across the Eurorack world.
Oh yeah, I was just chatting with another musician who I've, we played at NobCon together and stuff like that. He said, "Okay, I'm sick of this. My latest recording had noise as high as minus 48 dB. I have to get rid of this. What's going on here?" And one of the secrets to getting noise out of your system is lowering the resistance from ground, which happens to be this rail in my system, to your power supply, and eventually to your AC mains or wherever your earth ground is for your studio or your house. The lower the resistance from your DC power rail or from your modules to your earth, the quieter your system's going to be. So a lot of stuff I've done has been based on how do I get the resistance down. I'm using 12 gauge marine wire for all of my wiring in here to get the resistance down. Marine wire is called that because it doesn't corrode. It's very finely strand, so it's easier to bend, and each strand is tinned, so it's not a problem with the copper corroding and things like that. And I've doubled up all of the ground runs because, as John Loffink of Genus Moda pointed out to me, hey, the ground is carrying the return for the plus 12 and the minus 12. If you've got one cable for each of those, you should have two for the ground just to balance things out. So that's what I've done here. The other thing I've gone for is what's called a bus bar system, where I've got these 3 wide bars that are actually copper and then have been plated against so they don't corrode, running through the length of my case. And everything goes through those. And the reason I've gone with that is, again, a big hunk of copper is going to be lower resistance than, say, a 16 gauge wire running, from your power supplies off to your bus boards.
So those metal rods are literally carrying the voltage.
Yes, they're literally carrying the voltage, and I've had a few users fear for my life because of this. I did put ground on the one closest to me. So if I do something stupid and put my hand in the system, at least I'm going to hit ground before I hit the power rails. But I do have to be careful.
Yeah. There's been a few comments about the general safety of some of the open mains connections. Are you going to electrical tape this, hot glue gun? Are you going to mask off all the kind of mains?
I'm probably going to cover some of this. Now, what you're seeing here, these are not mains. These are the DC voltage.
Yes, yeah, the Eurorack power itself.
The mains down here do have these insulators over the sleeves, although there's I can get something there. I have plastic covers over my distribution of my mains voltages here, so I cannot get into those. And the bus bars going between them also have plastic insulation. The last step would be eventually putting electrical tape over these screws, just to make sure I don't do something stupid or dropping a screw into here doesn't short something out. They're exposed right now in case I need to get in and fix something or to troubleshoot something. Well, but eventually these will be covered. And the rest of the stuff, these are like some extra ground shields that I've gone ahead and put in here just to try to keep noise down wherever I can in the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this is, as of yet, somewhat untested. I'm sure you've plugged a module in to make sure it works. Yeah. But as a full system, this is still untested.
I'll hit the power so you can at least see the LEDs have come up on the lids here.
Yes,
I have plus 12 and minus 12, so most of the bus bars are not showing their plus 5 working yet. But where I do need plus 5, I have these little clavis no drains, which are my favorite way of generating plus 5 in a system. They use really quiet parts. They pull off of the minus 12 volt, which tends to be the less used bus in your system. And they're my preferred way of taking that noisy plus 5 voltage that comes usually from processors and modules, filtering it again, and then getting it out of the way. So, but yeah, this is the system on right now. These power supplies, these linear power supplies, are known to only be about 50% efficient.
Oh, wow.
So half the power is going to go to the modules, and the other half is going to become heat.
Right, okay. So that's not just a case of leaving headroom for the initial inrush, that kind of initial pull that is larger than the kind of idle state. That's just, they're 50% efficient.
Yeah, I don't want to, I don't want to stress them. And actually that inefficiency is taken into account in what the output is. But cooling is something I've really worried about in this case, because previously with the switching system, when I had it full of modules, I noticed it just kept getting hotter the longer I kept it on, and some modules kept drifting. So when I had the case apart, I made a point of drilling ventilation holes along the leading edge here, along the very top edge here, and there's also a row of holes underneath both of the power supplies. And the idea is, worst case, cool air will hopefully drift in from the bottom, underneath the backs of the modules, and exit the top. But also, I've added fans to the system as well. So I have a fan on each end of the system. I actually have speed controls for the fans, so I can play around to see just how fast I need to run them to keep the case quiet. And I can play around with whether or not they're just pulling air out of the case across the power supplies, or I might have this one blow air in, and then this one pull air out, just so I'm drawing cool air across the power supplies all the time. So this is something still to be worked out, is how hot this case is going to get.
I'm trying to say something again, just to see if you hear it, Ben.
It looks like we've got Kim back. If you can, again, test Kim and live chat. Again, sorry to keep doing this, but please do let us know. Is Kim echoing? It certainly sounds fine in my headphones, but we're a weird balance of Skype being pulled into OBS, and then the delays to what you see. I can't monitor the output of OBS without watching a heavily delayed stream, so it's a little bit of a nightmare at my end.
It is. I'm sorry that I'm echoing like that.
Streaming tech and just doing this kind of real dummy run and seeing what happens. I do like, just for the benefit of the live chat, as you've moved your computer up, it's like a little moon in the corner. That's the fan whirring and the little moon from Kim. But sorry, Chris, if you can let us know, people, did Kim echo like crazy? I'll mute him again now in OBS just to be certain. But so you're pulling air with the fans, Chris, across horizontally, and there's also holes top and bottom.
Yeah, the way I think I'm going to eventually run this case, although this is still to be tested, is I'm going to probably run both fans pulling air out of the bottom left and right corners. And you can see the fan outlets on the corners of the case there, as I try to fall over my mic cables. So there they are on the ends. And I think I'm going to have them pull air out of the case, and it's going to come in through the holes that are underneath the power supplies. You see a little bit of foam there for filtering. The bottom of the case here to draw air across these modules, and then the top of the case here to draw air across these modules. I think that's where I'm going to end up. I'm going to try the case without the fans running to see if this convective cooling just going from the bottom to the top is going to be enough. But if not, then I'm going to go dive in and play around with my speed controls and my fans to see how fast I have to run them.
It's just good to have the option. I mean, I would imagine it needs at least just the ventilation, if not the fans.
Yeah, because previously there was a heat problem, and these are going to be much hotter.
Well, that the 50%. I mean, you don't live in a cold place either. That's not like a handy thing. I quite enjoy winter with the window open in England and the modular on, and then I turn the heating off, in my room, and it's nice and toasty with the stack of cases that I have.
Yeah, fortunately, I do live in the mountains, so it's a little bit cooler here than down, like in town in Albuquerque. But yeah, heat is an issue in this room between this, the lights that I use, the computers. It does get very warm in this little studio.
I've just been, to give people a real horrible image, balancing which angles for a demo video I need to have a t-shirt on or off for, because it's been very hot in here. And with multiple Mordax datas in the screen, I'm like, oh, that's chest hair. People don't need to see that in the data window.
That's
sorry to scare people with that. That's a horrible thought, but
thank you for that image.
Yeah, just to really throw you off as I'm desperately trying to speak to Kim on Skype and watch the live chat and everything else. But you're doing a wonderful job of holding this together, Chris. Thank you for that.
No problem. So I did want to touch on one more thing about the fans while I'm here. It was recommended to me by someone who should know better. He said, "Oh yeah, get some PC gaming fans because they're cool." I said, "Okay, what do I connect them to?" He said, "Well, connect them to your plus 5 volts on your bus boards." And I'm like, wait a second. Fans are known for generating a lot of noise on their power lines. Why would I connect that to the bus boards where my modules are?
Yeah, why on earth would you do that?
And his thing was like, well, I said, is this going to be a problem? And his reply was, there's one way to find out. That was not an acceptable answer. I didn't want to wire it together, then find out it didn't work very well. So I'm actually using USB-powered fans, and I also have some USB-powered lights above the system as well.
All on separate.
That also really help illuminate the system.
Are they actually on separate outlets on the wall, or how is that all wired up? Because
I went ahead and coordinated everything as I put a separate USB power supply inside the case.
Okay.
And here's the USB plugs going to the fans and to the lights. And then that's connected to the mains down here. So I only have one connection and one switch to put the whole system on.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was afraid of noise from this power supply. So I went to a place that sold hobby metals and got some tin and rolled my own tin shrouds to run my DC power from my bus boards through and grounded those to the case just to try to cut down any noise coming from this power supply being inducted into those wires running to these bus boards.
Sorry, someone said in the live chat, is the footage available? I realise for the delay they mean my chest hair. I'll have to open a next level of Patreon support if we want to get serious about that. I think I did joke stupidly on Patreon originally that you get candid nude pics if you support at a $5 level or something stupid like that. No one's ever asked, thank God. Maybe I should change that. No, the footage isn't available.
I don't think they support porn on Patreon, just so you know, just in case they think you're serious.
Well, oh God, yeah, Bradfordian DivKid chest hair. I'm not sure what you'd classify it as. I'm not sure how aggressive they'd be about that. It's maybe a bit too weird for Patreon's classification. But I am monitoring Kim. We are going to try and get Kim back in. I'm scrambling behind the scenes. So
no problem.
That's a really good insight to the power so far. And as we go, we'll have some real kind of reports on this. It'd be good to say at this point that it's 7:30 p.m. UK, 8:30 p.m. For Central Europe time. What time is it for you, Chris? I forget that we start these streams.
It's 1 p.m. here in the mountains, the least populated time zone in the U.S., Mountain Time.
And we'll be doing these streams on Saturday. We'll move on to another section of this case. Depending on how far we get today within this stream, Chris will move on and fill these notes and trigger sections, and we can come back and ask questions. And we'll get to oscillators, shapers, effects, processors, all that kind of thing. So we will be streaming again on Saturday.
I did pick the least amount of modules for today just to be safe. But I also kind of wanted a flow from getting notes in to oscillators, to eventually filters and VCAs, to getting sound out. So that's, the 4 things are kind of laid out as signal flow as well.
Yeah, well, and as well, we can then nicely sequence things and not just have them drawn as they go into the case.
So before I dive into actually putting modules in, I also wanted to talk briefly about what I'm controlling the case with. In addition to sequencers and arpeggiators and fun stuff like that, and that's what we're going to be getting into today, I chose the Korg Tactile to be my keyboard controller for the system for a few reasons. One, it has an awesome arpeggiator. It's the only arpeggiator I've seen, and I'm sure there's others, and maybe you can fill in on the chat, that has rhythm patterns in the arpeggios. So instead of just being a constant stream of notes, there's pauses and rests and patterns that you can call up separately from what notes you're playing with the arpeggiator. And I thought that was particularly cool.
It's like
I don't know, Ben, if you're familiar with any other arpeggiator that does that, at least in the keyboard world?
I'm not too sure. It reminds me of the new Roland System X and XM in how that, depending on how you play into it, kind of there's AI to kind of intelligently learn how it applies rhythms to the arpeggiations and sequences. But it's very much like a much simpler version of the idea of decoupling rhythm from note generation in modular, which Stevie O's been a big component of in the modular scene for many years. It's something Meyer Melodies really likes to do, and certainly something that both you and I, Chris, have done in many videos as well, where you may have a steady sequence running, but then you're using some other gate generator, Euclidean pattern generator, to actually kind of carve in rhythmically to an already moving pattern. And it sounds like that's what this keyboard's doing, in that kind of.
It is. It does separate the rhythmic pattern from the notes you're playing. So you could have like a 4-note pause rest pattern, like just from the arpeggiator, but then do it as a 3 or 5 notes that you're holding down, get this rolling pattern.
Bomb Track in the chat says that the peak and the summit have a rhythmic arpeggio sequences as well.
Cool.
I think the SL Mark III might have some pattern things, unless it was when I was playing that into the peak. Maybe I was arpeggiating arpeggios with peak and the SL both set to arpeggiations at the same time.
Well, it was definitely one of the things that attracted me to this, one of the features as my controller keyboard, and why I'm going to work on synchronizing its MIDI clocks with the rest of the system. The return of Kim.
Yeah, it sounds like Kim's back. So let's just do another.
Not on OBS.
Let's just do another quick test. Kim, just again, what did you see when you strolled outside today?
My mind is blank now because I'm over into this echo thing. So right now I'm in USB mic mode. So please tell me if I'm still. I just got the Strymon Magneto the other day. Maybe that's why I'm echoing still.
You're putting your mic through the Strymon.
I would like to. Hopefully it's better now. I don't know what people say in the chat.
Okay, well I'll mute you in OBS again because that did fix the echo that we had, and I'll watch the chat, and presuming it's okay, we'll pull Kim and I back on screen.
Great. So, and other reasons I got this besides a really cool arpeggiator, 4 octaves, a little bit more than like the 2.5 octave I use in my videos, mod wheel, but also has a nice collection of both sliders and knobs. And I chose a MIDI interface, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on, that would allow me to get access to all the sliders, all the knobs, choose that maybe the sliders are just unipolar, just add voltage, but maybe make the knobs bipolar so I could subtract or add to what I was doing. It has an XY pad as well, which is a fun thing. And then it also has additional trigger pads. So I just loved the complement of control interfaces on this keyboard. And then, of course, I had to find a MIDI to CV gate interface that matched everything this got me. But some thought went into which controller I was going to get, and that's the reasons I got this particular one. Even though it's not at all common, you don't see these very often.
We have a dual looping Kim, according to Tim in the chat. That's like a special edition for MS module. I like that idea. We do still have an echo, so apologies if I'm somewhat absent or slow to respond to things. I am kind of running behind the scenes.
No problem.
I'll let you kind of keep filling for now, Chris, while I try and work this out.
I can talk for days. Unfortunately, I'm away from the computer, so I cannot see the chat. So I will require someone to shout any chat questions out to me, but I definitely want to get to anyone's questions. And again, this is not the only keyboard controller you can have. I've got a KeyStep. I've got a Max 25 from Akai. I've played with other ones. This was just a nice one for this system. My challenge is how to integrate it with the rest of the system. And what I'm probably going to do is add some folding shelving bars here to the front of my system so that it can sit down in front of the modular, but that I can go ahead and knock those bars down out of the way when I need to take the keyboard out of the way. So that's another thing where I'm thinking ahead of how do I use this whole system put together.
Yep. A couple of nice comments in the chat. Kim sounds like Hal on acid. It's definitely an OBS issue. For those that are asking, I really appreciate it again, but we're all coming into OBS through Skype, or Kim and Chris are, and I'm controlling OBS and streaming to my channel. So Chris also, just for your own reference, Chris and Kim, people are saying that you both start to echo when I unmute Kim, which would strongly suggest this is an OBS issue. For anyone that knows, I mean, do let me know if things change, but we're using the NDI in Skype, where you go into advanced settings and turn NDI on, which is an internal connection between programs, which is how OBS then pulls audio and video through. So anyone with any NDI Skype experience would be welcome in the chat. No specific questions for you, Chris, before we carry on, but I'll watch those, and I'm aware you can't see them, so I'll be sure to keep sending them your way.
That's all right. Yeah, I'll go in with a couple more general issues while you troubleshoot that. But it sounds like Kim's getting who's ever talking when he's unmuted. So something's looping back to him audio-wise there.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave you to it, Chris, just while I try again for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. The biggest hassle I had with this case was how to get this Monster 17 amp power supply inside here. I originally had a pair of 10 amp supplies that were about the size of this smaller one that I'm using for -12. And they fit comfortably in the back of the case. But when I had to go up to higher power to make sure I could deal with inrush current and just basically any module I want to throw at the system, I had to go to this really big power supply, and it became an issue of how do I stuff that in here and still have enough depth for modules. So I cut out a piece of paper that was basically the size of the end plate of this and kept arranging it in the case, figuring out where can I go ahead and make it fit. And eventually the solution was, one, to mount it at an angle, so it's kind of parallel to this particular row of modules, and two, make sure I had some very thin skiffable modules just in this particular section, so there was some clearance here. And I have about 45 millimeters of clearance between the power supply and the front of these rails. But I'll warn you on Modular Grid is just don't trust anyone's module depth numbers on Modular Grid, because some people measure from the very front of the knob on the module to the back of the module. Some do it from the panel to the back of the module. Almost no one takes into account
the power connector,
the height of the power supply connector.
From the knobs is a really special one. I guess it kind of makes sense to go from the height of the knob or the largest switch or something to the back. Well, kind of, as you're holding it, but that's not useful at all, really.
Yeah, maybe a separate measurement for case depth.
Yeah.
But whenever I do my videos, I do my own measurements from the back of the panel and let's make sure I don't plug this in backwards. By the way, I'm going to start a bet in the chat of how many modules I'm going to fry during the course of this install.
Well, you can hide that, because I'm questioning this streaming setup, so I don't think you'll fry any today. We'll see how many you manage to get plugged in. What I'd like to try, actually, if I mute Chris, and now will you speak, Kim, just one more time?
Yes, I'll say something. Dave, this is not okay. Am I sounding like hell again?
Okay.
So let's see what people say. I have separate mic and separate headphones.
Okay.
So it might
I can
work.
see this issue, Kim. If you leave it there, we'll go back to Chris. When I unmute either Chris or Kim in OBS, you both come through each other's by the looks. So I'm expecting, as I go to the live chat, yes, no echo. So it's a case of I can see both of your audio, but I can't have them both unmuted. So that's a little bit awkward. It's another thing to juggle, but at least we know that we can pull Kim in. Okay, Kim, wave at me if you if you want to jump in the chat, and I'll let Chris kind of ride away.
You can hear me now, Ben, right? Though I'm muted in OBS.
I can, and everyone else can hear you now, Kim, if you'd like to say anything.
Oh, great. I'll just say thank you out there for everyone trying to help solve this problem.
We'll keep testing. We did test for those that are kind of commenting, what did you walk into, and add sources one by one. We have tested days ago and earlier today as well. Anyway, I will mute Kim and bring Chris back in. Sorry, Chris. Let's continue. So we were talking about module depth, and that's looking like where that will be an issue is that massive diagonally mounted power supply. It's quite close to the rails.
So I kind of made some choices I made a point of putting slender, skiffable modules here where it's going to get the closest to the rails. Mutable instruments modules are very thin, as are many surface mount modules, but there's no way I'm going to get a through-hole module like an LB or a Doepfer or an EMW here. There's just not enough depth. It falls away here, and it's not too bad here, but then the rest of the places, I have plenty of space. But this was another consideration, is I had to think about what modules went where this power supply was. So it was just like a lot of thinking ahead of time, but I wanted to show you some of the craziness. Excuse the shaky cam while I take my camera off my tripod for a second. I even created these little brackets to go ahead and mount the power supply to the back and to the bottom at an angle.
Is there a benefit to air flowing behind it? Is there a benefit to air being able to flow behind the power supply?
That certainly does not hurt. Now, the Acopians do have these very generous vents all around them. And there's one side of the Acopians which tend to have the very thick fins for cooling. But a little bit of ventilation doesn't hurt. The other thing I've done is linear power supplies will vibrate more the more stress you put them under. And if you've got them just lazily bolted to the bottom of your case, they could start vibrating your entire case. So Matthew Goyke actually warned me about this ahead of time. So I've got rubber grommets where I'm attaching to the power supply, and these big rubber isolators wherever I attach to the case, just to cut down on that possibility. Now, this power supply still puts out noise, physical mechanical noise. The transformer in it actually vibrates even under no load, and you can hear that buzz a little bit. And I'm hoping that just putting modules over it is going to mute that sound. We'll find out.
One more time, because one more thing to test, because if we crack this, I'll be super happy going forward.
No, I want to, because I want Kim's input on this as well.
Of course.
If just to laugh at me how crazy I am.
Kim, you're muted in OBS. I know you can hear me through Skype, and of course the live chat can hear me live. Can you chat, Kim? Let's see if you just come through Chris's channel on OBS.
I'll say something now. It seems like I'm muted in OBS when I watch the screen, but I'm saying something now. No wonder if it's going through.
I can see you moving on Chris's audio meter, so I do wonder if you were coming through, because the meter's moving, which would be...
Okay, I have my speaker turned down really low, but Ben, let me just briefly turn my audio off, then have Kim talk to see if it's an acoustic thing in my room. Okay. So my speaker audio is off. Kim, talk.
I'm talking now. It seems like I'm muted in OBS, but I'm talking. Oh, that was a fake echo. Sorry about that. I wonder if you can hear me now, because it seems like I'm muted in OBS.
Ah, it works. There we go. Success. All this nice space I've set up where me and Kim don't have to look like deer in headlights. No more.
So it wasn't me after all.
No, poor Kim has been moving around like mad in the background.
Yeah.
Okay, so lesson learned for those in OBS. If anyone is curious about this streaming, do ask me afterwards, and I'll share the experience my side. I can see Chris Skype and Kim Skype as two separate calls. They come in as two separate video windows, and also two separate audio sources. But when Kim talks, it's moving Chris's meter and vice versa, which is clearly where that just manic, I think as Schmoozer said, just absolute sample fodder amazement or absolute car crash happened. I think we sound. So I think I'm not going to do anything, because I could globally mute both of you which is of no use. So you are live, Kim. You're now in the chat, and there's no echo.
So I should be careful about what I say. But it's great to be through.
Let's pull us both in. There we go. We were staring at, deer in headlight vibe there. Okay, I think we're sorted. And I think other than me just being in the left, which I'm aware of for anyone that's joined after that was in the comments, I'll try and figure that out. I think I need to split into 2 channels on my interface, which, I don't have an XLR splitter. I can have potentially for next time. Anyway, we are now good. So we can join you, Chris, from you being in charge of this train.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I was just curious, I said, now they have my audio muted, I wonder what they are saying.
Yeah, there may be a slight bit of echo, but with Chris moving between webcam on the computer and standing around this big case, there's going to be speakers in the background for Chris, but hopefully be minimal if the speakers are fairly quiet.
Yeah, I've got my audio turned down. I mean, we will talk about some of the tech later. I can try some stuff like some closed back headphones next time, and hopefully this won't be too crazy.
Okay, great. So we were talking about depth and the power supply. What's the actual depth above that diagonally mounted power supply? The other question I have looking at that shot, why, if I transition over to you being full screen again, Chris, why is one diagonal and one not? They're separate power supplies, aren't they? You went over that.
Yeah, the big supply here is for plus 12, and it's delivering more power because according to Modular Grid, my system needed almost twice as much power on plus 12 as it does minus 12. So I had to put in a big supply for that. I needed less power on minus 12, so I went for the smaller supply, which fits very neatly back in the back corner of this system, no problem at all. But I just couldn't get this much amperage in something that size. I had to go to a bigger case. And I even talked to them about custom solutions and all sorts of silly stuff. But if I wanted to have that much power, I had to take up that much room.
Okay, we have a question, and I believe this is where we're going anyway. I'm not going to try and butcher the name, but the question was, can you tell me what do you use for MIDI to CV, or is that a spoiler? Well, that's exactly the kind of topic for today's show is note and trigger generation, which will include getting the MIDI in and out. Do you ever take MIDI out or just MIDI in?
I just put MIDI in. The only reason some background for people, I used to be the technical chairman of the MIDI Manufacturers Association back in the 80s and 90s. And I laugh that today I use it mostly just for MIDI clocks.
You are one of Mr. MIDIs from around the world.
So yeah, I don't take MIDI out of the system. I do put MIDI in mainly for my controller keyboard and to synchronize. I'm probably going to use DynSync to synchronize this case with my gigging case.
The gigging case is a whole other can of worms. With that, but yeah. So is that the only thing you're really moving around the room? Are you syncing to a computer ever, or is that the kind of virtual tape machine of you will just print audio onto a machine and that's it?
I do want to sync it to the computer eventually because my background, in addition to synthesis, is I used to be quite a sample loop person. I adopted Ableton Live from version 1.0. And the long-range goal is to reintegrate my modulars with Live. I do want them to be in time with each other. I might as well put myself up on the camera while I'm talking here. So I do have an intention of eventually synchronizing the modular and the laptop. And there's a couple ways of doing that. There's these new CV tools that are inside Ableton, which is a way of sending a clock out. I probably would use Ableton as the clock master in that case, and have my different cases slave off of that. But I've encountered other Ableton users I've been recording with who don't have CV tools or don't have a proper interface that's DC coupled to use CV tools. So I've been playing around with this thing called Missing Link from Circuit Happy. And it's a little device that logs onto your Wi-Fi network and becomes one of the mobile live clock devices that Ableton Live can talk to. So Ableton Live will talk to this little box, which will then send DynSync, etc., out to my modular. And when I integrate the two, that's probably the path I'm going to use.
I wonder how much success you might have with Ableton Link. I know Vlad at VPME was working on a module for a while, and was it licensing maybe that made that not happen? I recently.
Well, the Circuit Happy Missing Link does use Ableton Link. That's how it talks.
Okay. I was using Ableton Link between Endless, the app, and Ableton, and absolutely seamless. And then using Ableton to then, it was through a BeatStep Pro or a KeyStep, one or the other, into the modular. And it was very, very seamless between iPad, which I could also then take iPad audio back into the modular through an audio interface, use kind of the laptop with Ableton in the corner and not touch the thing, but it just kept it all talking to each other really nicely.
Yeah. The one problem I have with Missing Link, and it's not their fault, it's how loopists work, and I need to talk to them, is people whose loops are used to the idea that when you stop a loop, it ends right before the downbeat of the next measure. And I'm much more used to the idea that when you stop something, you hit the downbeat of the next measure, and that's your final ending hit. And what I found is when I stop Ableton Live, Missing Link will stop just short of that downbeat of the next measure. And I wish it would just put that one more clock out so I could get like a last hit or something on the downbeat, rather than, psych, you didn't get the last beat.
Yeah, if it stops the system, you don't get that choice. Of course, both can work really nicely, but you don't want every single thing to end with the just a kind of pull at the end. I wonder how you get around that. Could you deliberately work a beat off of time, almost like pulling yourself in and out somehow with a gate delay, or?
You know that you're just like setting yourself up for tears later on when you try to fool systems like that. Circuit Happy does have a couple systems, like one where it'll keep the clock running even when start and stop have gone into stop mode. So I'm going to see if they can code up an alternate mode where when you see a stop, delay sending it to the modular for just one more beat.
Womber in the live chat, I'm not sure who he's answering, but there's talks of Mark in the live chat. Hey Mark, options for converting voltages to other standards. I think you mean audio in and out, differences between line and Euro, and potentially lower than line. If you mean something different, let me know. Wombra said that Perfect Circuit covered that in a short live stream last night. Presuming you both mean the same thing, great. The live chat is self-fulfilling itself, which is very good. So, MIDI-in, you're going to DIN sync between the live case and the full case.
Yeah, because MIDI, particularly MIDI over USB, can get shifted and jittered a little bit. So it makes a MIDI clock stream not dead on tight, unfortunately. Yeah. It's an idiosyncrasy of the way they implemented MIDI over USB. Whereas DIN sync is just always exactly on. And I found that even some modules like Pamela's new workout really wants DIN sync. It does not even have a MIDI input because they don't find MIDI to be stable enough for them to phase lock loop and generate all of their in-between beats off of.
Okay. I'm back. I've no idea why I'm only on the left audio. I'm not going to get sick of people asking the same question. Sorry if people that have been in from the start.
He's going to whisper sweet nothings into your ear.
Sorry if those that have been in from the start feel like we keep flogging a dead horse with this one. People obviously come in as they can. No idea. My setup, just to briefly go through it one final time really, microphone into interface on channel 1, setting OBS to listen to my interface, and for some reason it's just on the left. I don't have an XLR splitter to immediately split off this microphone to go into channels 1 and 2, which may fix it to hand. We will see for next time. Any tips time back would be great.
That'll fix it. It is unfortunately a Mac audio thing. I had the same problem when I record my microphone into apps like ScreenFlow, is it thinks it's hard left, and I have to play with the panning later on. I think it's a Mac thing.
Yeah, okay, so we'll move back over to the case. So what interface, we're thinking of the MIDI and the syncing of everything. Do people have spare audio channels? Could you do an audio clock like the old kind of drum machine trick of taking the rim shot out as an audible clock, just a short percussive sound? Is that something you've tried?
I've not tried that. It's something that could be done. And actually, I'm having fun playing with a friend of mine, Richard Bugg, down in LA, and he has an old EMU modular with their old digital sequencer. And we are working with him, sending me something slower than DIN sync, like 8th notes or 16th notes, and then having Pamela's new workout phase lock loop that up to a higher rate to drive the rest of my system. And initially that was looking really promising. You could take an audio like, the tick, 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 tock, tick, 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 and run it into an envelope follower, and then take the gate rise and use that to drive your system. Theoretically works. It depends on how good the envelope follower is and how stable it is on triggering that gate when it hears a sound. If it's an analog one, it'll probably be pretty tight. If it's a digital one, you're probably going to get some variance as to when it's measuring that audio level coming in and sending the gate out.
Okay. It's worth trying the audio clock. I've had useful results of it. A tip from... make sure I get the name right. Ed Random in the chat says that he clocks his rack with a single cycle wave from Simpler in Ableton. Nice simple way to do it. I've putting a kick drum in Ableton, but then using the clip envelope to just really shorten it down, and then usually just hammering the gain on the way out. It really doesn't matter if it clips, if it's super short trigger.
Yeah,
that tends to fix it when I've tried.
Before CV tools came along, my original plan to drive Ableton into my modulars, I've been using an Expert Sleeper's ES8 interface, which I've had very good success with. And I was just going to create a loop, an audio loop, that was just a 24 PPQN clock, and have that on a track and live, and let that just keep playing that loop with no time, without interpolation, and just let that always be my tightly in sync clock. So even if I sped live up or slowed it down, it would speed up that loop or slow that loop down, come out through the ES8 and have that clock my system.
So some questions in the chat coming up about how do you even organize a system this large? Whether they mean my stack of cases, I don't think they do. But if we go back to yours, Chris, that's very much something we were wanting to go through with these. So that we kind of bottom left corner of this case, if you can move over to your case camera.
Yep.
I can actually show you briefly. This is what we're setting up. So the bottom left of what the live chat can see, and Chris, if you can hear me, you now can. This is the modular grid for Chris's setup. We're going kind of bottom left, kind of halfway in, bottom two rows, notes and trigger generation. The next few streams, which will be Saturday coming, and then Wednesday and Saturday again, we will go through different sections of the case, but we're going to stick with notes and triggers for today. So going back over to your full system, Chris, the only thing we've really spoke about so far in terms of organizing the case is module depth next to that power supply.
Yeah, I am very much like to think in terms of a visual signal flow from left to right through my system. And I also like to know that my modules are grouped together. So if I think of, okay, I need another oscillator, okay, I need another filter, then I just go to a section of the case and they're all there, rather than saying, no, wait a second, that filter's here, but that other filter's over here. That kind of takes me personally out of a creative flow. So I've kind of devised this case to flow from bottom left, up, across, and out the bottom right. All my note inputs, the sequencers, the arpeggiators, the MIDI to CV converters, which we will be getting to today, I swear, are down here in the lower left. And then I basically have, and I don't get outside my camera range here, my oscillators and sound sources are above that. In the middle of the case, I have a Grand Central station with mixers to go ahead and combine those signals together. And then on the other side of the case, I have my filters up top, VCAs down below. So I kind of go oscillator, filter, VCA. In between, I have like one row that's going to be dedicated to modulation sources. A lot of LFOs on one side, a lot of envelopes on the other side, but they're kind of interchangeable because they're very flexible modules. But I just wanted to have a flow that went from left to right, more or less visually, kind of did a loop, but I still have to do some things like have a Grand Central station in the middle of the case where signals can be mixed or redispatched to other parts of the case. And I also have found I needed to sprinkle some VCAs among the oscillator section in particular, because I'm doing a lot of stuff like enveloped dynamic FM, where I need to go through a VCA, and it made no sense for all the VCAs to be over there and all the VCOs to be up here. So I put a couple VCAs over here just for that purpose. But other than that, I'm very much I'm doing this, put all my choices in one place so I can look at it and decide who I'm going to use today. Okay, I need to add another oscillator voice. They're all there. I look at them all together and then decide what to use, rather than being hunting around the case.
It's a really good point about dotting VCAs around. I imagine things like buffered mults, unity mixers, precision adders, those kind of things being dotted around are useful. Mixers are usually the one I forget. I've certainly sorted out my system before with kind of by function. This case or this area or this corner is this sound generation, processing or sequencing. And it's always really awkward. So as this grows across these streams, I very much doubt Chris is going to fill this case just in these 4 streams. We'll check in each time and check in on the few days' progress. But where do you start? What have you got a most important thing, the most important first module, either something that's really spoken to you and has to be in there, or it's just a key sync point or a starting point for most patches?
Well, I am one of those collectors who like to have one of each is my approach, because I really treat this big case as being my sandbox.
Yeah.
This is my lab. This is what I play in. This is my experiment. I want one of each so I can just try things. My gigging case is much more focused. Like, this is primarily a percussion case. It's very focused on, I have to have a grids in there. That's my main pattern generator for drums. And actually, one of the rare things you'll see is in most cases, my studio case has different modules than my gigging case. However, the one exception is, and we might also start talking about getting some modules in here, is I do have a grids in both cases. And I also use a 512 vector sequencer in both cases. And I considered using different sequencers, but I realized that sequencers are so deep these days that you really want to focus on learning the intricacies of one digital sequencer and master that. I didn't want to try to master 3 different digital sequencers. And the 512 just really kind of spoke to me because it's the closest I've seen that combines the feel of an analog sequencer. I still have the Doper 16X series of analog sequencers in terms of having all these knobs and having a huge display, but then having a lot of power to go underneath the hood and have subsequences and change sequences and ratcheting and chance operations and all that other stuff.
I totally agree with the big sequencer thing. I see that moving sequencers for me, and we're both in a somewhat of a luxury position of working with these modules and people and being able to try a lot of equipment. It's a complete holiday of a system. It's almost like moving formats sometimes. When I've been living, I don't have a vector sequencer, but I imagine if I was in that space for a set amount of time, it's almost the whole of a system just swapping out the sequencer. It makes sense to have that be constant somewhat. Why grids is something that I was curious about. I love grids, and I'm playing devil's advocate with this because I would
go ahead. And we'll put grids in here in a second.
Defend it to the hills.
I like the way grids works. Now, I do have several different pattern generators. And part of my challenge is I am not as up on music theory or playing instruments as well as other people are. I'm much more of a 10,000-foot producer sort of person in terms of this is the effect I want to create. And I found that rather than having to create my own patterns from scratch or to have really rigid patterns, I liked the layout of grids in terms of saying I've got a grid of 5 by 5 different patterns, because that's how it's laid out internally. As I move between them, you interpolate between those patterns. But then I can also control the density of each of my tracks, 3 different percussion tracks, nominally kick, snare, hat, but they have different roles. Yeah. And then beyond that, it has this wonderful chaos control down here, where it will say, okay, we're going to play that same pattern, go do a variation, then come back to the initial pattern. And for me, that's really important because I don't like things to be repetitive forever. I get bored easily. I don't like things to be completely random. A problem with some generative music is that it never resolves. And when it doesn't resolve, people can get bored listening to it. They kind of give up trying to find what the theme is. So I like Grid's approach in that I can have a central theme, go do variations by increasing the density in individual tracks or having chaos go do fills, but then it resolves back to a main pattern. And to me, that fits what a human drummer, et cetera, does. And it works really well with my mindset of how to compose music.
I think however versed in music theory you are or not, or rhythmic work, or, playing percussion or not, I've said several times, teaching and playing drums was my musical kind of upbringing and professional music kind of career, as it were, well before modular for many years. But I like just giving in to the machine. I'm happy to just turn up grids and go, give me more. Play more notes in this bar. It plays along like a good band member. And as you know, it's clocked, it's in time. I've always been very happy with what it's given me. I know some people are unhappy that they don't feel like they're completely sequencing every single part of it. But you're also not sequencing every part of a Euclidean generator. You're, of course, setting the parameters in which it works, but not entirely step by step. I do like grids, and I brought it up purely just to give it a bit of love, because I don't think it.
And that's a good philosophical thing, is either you're generating completely from scratch, you're selecting a pattern someone else has made for you. But I like to collaborate with my instruments, and for me, grids was a more collaborative environment where it can be like a drummer, where I can say, make that busier, strip that out, make that more sparse. Can you add just a little bit of a flair to that? Those sort of general terms. I have the good fortune or the damage of playing with a lot of jazz musicians. So I'm used to thinking in those terms when it comes to composing, as opposed to, this is my pattern, or, oh, that's a cool pattern. I want something more interactive. To me, modular is collaborating with the instrument. Yeah. So yeah, I do like the give and take with grids.
Yeah, totally agree. Jazz at music college was my thing as well, so I'm well aware of the kind of jazz world. But this idea of play more or play less, you can't always just make it super simple. And because grids is kind of musically studied in rhythms of the world, how it carves out information in terms of making patterns more dense or more sparse is very musical.
Yeah, and it's lovely just to be able to create that arc where I start very sparse, and then as the piece gets excited, I just crank these up to add density, but it's variations on that current pattern. And then when I want to wind a piece down, I can go ahead and pull down the density. It just works with the way I like to improvise and the way I like to compose.
Yeah. One nice trick that I remember talking to someone about in some kind of Skype session I was doing with them ages ago was that you could run an AND logic gate or make one in a VCA to make sure it absolutely doesn't play a note in a certain point of the bar if you needed it to. So if you had a spare CV sequencer, the solution we had was, and I apologise for in the chat because I forget the name, but he said, I don't want any beats in the last half of the bar. Effectively, within the last eighth note, I don't want any bursts or flurries of notes. And we came up with a solution of, if you have a spare CV sequencer, turn up every step other than that last one, use that as the CV depth control of a VCA, and then grids as the input. So you know that CV is going to pull the VCA off, and then therefore none of grid's pattern will actually pass through on that last beat. You could do the same by putting both signals into an AND logic gate as well, which is a really...
That's exactly what I do, Ben. And one of the things that's part of this rhythm generation section is a bunch of logic modules. And I do exactly that with grids. Is I put on one side of an AND gate, and I'll put something like maybe a square out of Pamela's new workout into the other side of the AND gate to say, play for the first half, for the first measure plus the downbeat, 51%. Go silent for the remainder of the second measure, then come back on again. So I'll use AND gates to make this sit out, as you say. Or I'll take Euclidean rhythms and that with this to go ahead and latch on and off to decide what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's exactly what modular is for me, and it's perfect for it. And that using VCAs as AND gates, mixers as OR gates, all of that's useful if you don't have specific logic modules. Which maybe pop a logic module on screen. I don't know if that was the next one you were going to place in the rack.
It's a little bit down the list, but let me dig through my bin here.
A bin of modules.
It might be a couple of layers down in the modules.
If it's awkward to get to, maybe just what was it? What was the module choice for logic for you?
Well, for this case, it's centered, and we're going to get to this today. I should start installing modules. I should start installing modules. I'm using a plug in this case, and I'm using the Animodule Logic Object in my gigging case. I supplement them both with additional modules, and I'll get to that when I install modules.
You're welcome to start screwing in, Chris. For those that join later, the very original idea of this stream was, would someone want to watch someone else fill a modular case? And there is definitely oh God, look at the size of that modular case. Yes, I want to see it. But then we got to discussing how long this may take to actually do. And it was like, no one's going to sit for the 10 hours it takes you to fill this thing in. That's crazy. But then you realize along the way, to have Chris's knowledge and input along the way and what's led to this system is incredibly valuable. Now, all the kind of tech issues we had up front have kind of tainted the start of the stream, but that's effectively what we want to get into, getting these modules in the case and to run through them as much as we can. And of course, take questions for those watching live. So 512 and grids, they're the starter. Why when there's MIDI cables is the expander for the 512 on the right hand side? My gut reaction says get it on the left.
Here you go. This is the first question for you and chat to vote on, is which side should I put the expander on? Because my original thought was, unfortunately, they come with very long cables to join the two together.
Okay, good.
So I can put the expander on the left or the right side. That's not an issue. The cables are long. And my first thought was, I'm going to put the expander down here because, for one thing, it's deep, and I didn't want to bump into the power supply.
Okay.
As it turns out, it will just fit over that power supply. But my other thought was, well, if I'm going to connect to external cases, I'm going to want my MIDI jacks down here hanging off the side of the case and not going across the modular. So I thought, that's where it belongs. It belongs down here. And then I started thinking, but all the CV and gate and modulation outputs are here as well. And do I want to drape all those across the sequencer as well? And the more I thought about it, I thought, well, honestly, I'm going to be using this case standalone more often than I'm going to be syncing it to external MIDI. So I'm thinking about already taking a deviation from the modular grid and instead putting them like that just to get all these outputs closer to the rest of my modules.
Did I see that the rails are ever so slightly apart on the row above it? Is there a slight gap between the rails?
So I've cheated. I've done this install once before, only to find out it didn't work.
Okay.
And I found out that one of my problems was getting the rails at exactly the right angle. If I tightened down all the rails first and then started putting modules in, they might be warped or off on an angle to each other. So I'm purposely starting off with the rails really loose and floppy till I get the modules where they want to be, and then I'm going to tighten the rails down to make sure they're at the correct angle, because I kind of screwed up last time when I tightened these first and realized modules weren't fitting in, things were at bad angles, things like that.
Okay. That's a good point. I've had similar issues with cases as well. But what I meant with the gap between the rails is I have a Lamon 12U case that has a slight gap, maybe around just under a centimetre between the rails, and it's really handy for just tucking cables in.
Yeah, I take advantage of that in my gigging case. Actually, this row is at a different angle than this row. So by the time that you rotate this rail into place for the row above it, the gap kind of goes away.
It's not going to work. Okay.
So, Chris, I have a question, if I'm not echoing. So I'm just wondering, do the expander, does it have to be on the side of the sequencer, or could you have it down in the corner?
The cables are very long. I could put it into a corner somewhere, yes. I would just have to
above, have the sequencer more like in a more interactive
underneath.
Position.
That would be nice for the MIDI cables right in the bottom corner.
And then bring it out like that,
Yeah, you could have the sequencer on the bottom if you want to have like control close to where you actually maybe it's more convenient.
Well, eventually my MIDI CV stuff's going down here. Partly because it does have a USB cable hanging off of it all of the time to the controller keyboard. And it was kind of logical for me to do that. This is also a very good angle to view the display on this.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Ergonomics are really important to me.
Quick question. Sorry, Chris, go on.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was influenced by, like many people from my generation, of all the pictures of Tangerine Dreams modulars with the sequencers along the top row, or Keith Emerson's sequencers on the top row. So that's how I laid out my case initially. And I found out that just gave me a neck strain.
Yeah.
So I decided to put the sequencers down with where my other pitch and CV stuff is.
Quick question, somewhat unrelated, but we will keep chipping in any specific questions. David Ramirez asked, any consideration for 1U when putting the case together?
I looked at 1U because I was originally going to custom build this case. The original idea was to custom build this out, and I've got some other weird format stuff from the 70s I was going to integrate into it. So I was thinking about having a 1U row at least initially. But when I was planning on getting a case, there was the format wars between the Pulp Logic and IntelliGel. Well, I have a half row of one size and a half row of another size. And back then, you did not have as many module choices in 1U. So when I saw the ADDAC Monster frame, I said, okay, I'm good. I'm just going to go with 3U all the way. The 1U market's changed a lot since I got this back in 2016 or whatever.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot more choices. Now the IntelliGel format's pretty much winning out. I think the 1U stuff is really convenient. If I was to build another live case, I'd see if I can put a 1U row in there and still get it into airline carry-on. But at the time I bought this case, it wasn't a factor. I looked at it and I said, nah, I'll never fill this. Look how big that case is. I'll have plenty of room for full-size utility modules. And of course, it's full already.
I have to chip in and say that having 1U in a live case is so great, because there's so many utilities, just like VCAs, like IntelliGel's new VCA modules, like dual VCAs. That's really great to have. Just stuff them into the live case.
Yeah, absolutely. Some 1U goes a really long way now. You're right though, Chris. It's changed a lot. The kind of format, and as you say, the IntelliGel kind of sub format of tiles or 1U is definitely kind of winning out.
Yeah.
There's a hell of a lot of very good Pulp Logic modules, very cheap though. Was my thing when I got into the 1U thing. Not much money at all, and very good quality still. So.
But then you might know the converter thing. How is it? You can make a conversion so you can kind of mount one type of modules in the other 1U format, right?
I think you can get IntelliGel into Pulp Logic, but not the other way around. I think.
But it takes some tweaking and stuff.
It's the space between the rails, I think, as opposed to because 1U is 1U. It's a definitive measurement, which is what both people argue, I think, not wanting to get too deep into that. But
the difference is the lip on the rail.
Vector rails or
Z-rails. Pulp Logic assumed that you would have rails that did not have lips, so their panels take the full height, whereas IntelliGel assumed you would have lips on your rails like Dope First standard, and they had made a smaller panel for that reason.
Okay. You want to get some stuff screwing in, Chris. If we're anywhere near...
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Let's get some more modules in here. So
keep them coming out of the bin. I don't know. It's an American term, but bin to me is very much like a trash can. The bin is where the rubbish goes. Yeah. So I quite like the idea of bins of modules.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have bins of modules around here. Trust me. So another tip when installing modules is it's very nice to be logical. You know, I joke, I'm half German, I'm Virgo, and I'm an engineer. By both nature and nurture, I am the way I am. So my tendency would be to say, let's build from left to right. But the problem is that as you start doing that, you start covering the bus board, and it gets harder and harder to reach back and get modules plugged into the bus board. So I'm actually going to kind of break now that I've got the vector in place, because I wanted to show some of the clearance issues. And this jack expander just barely fits in there, by the way. But I pre-test that ahead of time. So I'm going to go down to the right edge and start filling in modules from here, just to make it easier for me to run power connectors back and see what I'm doing. And also the power LEDs on the bus boards are in the middle on the libs. So I periodically turn on power just to make sure all the LEDs are still coming on. And if I don't see them, I turn it off immediately and hope I didn't fry a module.
There are a few people saying, joining in the idea of how many modules are we going to fry in this setup.
I'm taking bets. I think we should have a book on this.
I'm going very low. I think you're too careful and thoughtful in approach to be frying them left, right, and centre. But maybe one. I don't know.
There's
got to be at least one mistake. I mean, now since I've already installed the modules once in the previous case, only to find I didn't have enough power, a lot of them already have at least this connected, and the libs have shrouded headers. But the last module I fried is I had a cable, that was wired wrong. The connector was backwards on one end.
Yeah.
And when I plugged it into something that was shrouded on both sides, it fried the module. I fried a distinct.
If someone in the chat can keep note, I'm going 1, Kim's going 2.
keep score in the chat, and we'll see
if
how we are in a
few days.
Someone
wants to nominate themselves chief of frying modules, and everyone can comment at that person, and someone can keep tabs. But yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I'm going to start installing modules, Ben.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going for it.
When we decided...
I'm going to go down on this end and work my way in just to keep this bus board uncovered so I can get in around it. It's a little tight around this power supply, so I don't want to cover it with modules and then try to figure out how to fish my hand in there. Part of my arsenal for triggers and notes has now become always having a trigger delay module. I have the Erica Pico T to G trigger to gate in my gigging case, and here I just happen to have the Doepfer A162 T-Del, the dual trigger delay. And trigger delays by themselves are kind of cool. You can do some Steve Reich phasing stuff where you go ahead and put stuff out of time and bring it back in time. You can use it to add a hold stage in front of an envelope, so you get like wah, delaying when an envelope maybe opens a filter. But for me, most of the time, I'm turning the delay down to 0, and I'm playing with the length. Setting the length of the gate coming out of something like a Euclidean circles or a grids or an accent trigger allows me to decide how long that pulse is going to be to another module. Maybe I want to fatten the pulse to a low-pass gate to get a little fatter sound out of it. Maybe I have some modules that miss really short triggers. Digital modules that have to scan their input jacks will miss very short gates. So you might need to increase the length of the gate coming out of some modules to trigger like sample players correctly. And also, as I've gone more into modules that have choke controls on them, I've been wanting to set the length to be some musical division, like an 8th note, 16th note, or whatever. When you just have a very short accent to open or close a hi-hat, that's not really the full note. You're not really hearing the full effect. But by having a trigger delay with length controls, I can now dial in, when I hit this with an accent pulse, how long is that hi-hat opened or closed, as opposed to just being a blip. So this is one of those unusual utility modules that I consider to be essential, actually, in my systems for the type of really rhythmic type stuff I do.
Fighting talk in the chat room.
Nuts are Satan's curse. But we're going to run into a case today where I'm going to wish I had sliding nuts. I'm certain of it.
Potentially in this
Another
case,
problem,
yeah.
Another problem is that even though these are threaded rails inside these, it's really hard to get threaded rails that are a meter long or 197 HP.
Yeah.
Foxtone sold them briefly and gave up because they had real problems with yields and with shipping. So in the Monster frame, all these rails are shorter pieces of threaded strips that are floating about. So they're like a giant sliding nut.
Yeah, I've got that in one of my 12U in the GMSN slipper case. And it's really handy, actually, to have like an 84 HP strip and an extra 20 or whatever it is in that case. So yeah, that's handy that they're not huge long. I know Ross Lamond was getting in 168 HP strips at some point. I think. I'm sure he's had them in one piece. I'm not sure how well that went. What about you on this one?
I've got some problems. Yeah, but it gives me problems because some modules have slots and some, like the Doepfers, just have that hole. So I'm going to have to, I'm keeping my screws purposely loose right now so I can slide things in to make sure I can get modules into next to each other, because I'm going to run into some spacing problem here at some point. And actually, since I don't know exactly where this module is going yet, I have to put in the other modules to its left. I'm going to take out the nuts for now and slide it all into place later on.
So Chris, why are you using Nurley's nut at all, or only in your live case, or not at all?
I use Nurley's in my portable case because I was swapping modules so often, and I also wanted to be able to pull a module on the road even if I didn't have any tools with me. I've already invested in like several hundred of these little hex nuts, and I added up, how much money it was going to cost me to buy Nurley's for this entire case. And I said, let's go with what I have.
All right.
I like Nurley's, but I already have a bunch of these.
Are you using washers then?
I put washers behind everything.
For what reason?
I
know how they work, of course, but is it resale value? Is it your own? You just like to keep them clean and nice?
There's some. I do turn over modules. I do sell some modules, and some people care if there is a bit of, let me see if I can get that close, rash around the corner. Some people will care about it when you buy a used module. I've half joked that we should not be using plastic washers. We should be using lock washers behind all of these to make sure there's a great ground connection. And I was told that is Hinton or someone who just went crazy when he saw that I mentioned that. He's just like, no, what are you talking about? But sometimes it's fun just to throw statements like that out there.
I've got some hideously rack-rashed modules, and truth be told, I really don't care. I mean, I would maybe if it was new or it was particularly expensive, but yeah, it's not something that particularly bothers me.
So I need to ask you guys also about, because there was a question in the chat about aesthetics. So what about the colors of the modules? I'm a designer, you know, so I'm supposed to care about it, though I don't really. But what about you guys?
I like that. I'm the one that should care, but I don't.
I know some people like purposely group modules from the same manufacturer, or at least the same color together aesthetically. Since I'm a one of each person, and I don't care who the manufacturer is, it's going to be a mess. So I don't care. So I group by function instead of by color. But you know, I'm one of these poor engineers who have no aesthetic sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm very much mainly for doing the videos. There's a lot of mine is grouped by manufacturer, but it's not through an attempt to have like a black section or a black rail or a particularly kind of grayscale plain section against a more colourful one. It's not really something. The advantage of building an instrument in a layout that fits me, that enables me to kind of create, is way more important than forcing in the colour of the panel. Or
yeah. But if you remember the techno modules from Eric Sense, yeah, right? They did some in white.
Yes.
Because in a heated setting in a club or whatever, you can reach out for the white filter module, or bass drone is black or whatever.
Yeah.
There's some kind of sense to that, isn't there?
Yeah, I've not performed enough in dark clubs
Me neither.
to comment on dark modules. And I don't think I've used that many black panels when I've performed even in good light, which it wouldn't matter anyway. Yeah, good point about an all-black system in a dark space. Fortunately, this huge thing that Chris has is going nowhere.
Yeah, I've considered, like, wouldn't it be great to take this to some spaces and play, but I would need help. It's quite heavy now. When I do buy modules that offer black or silver options, I look really hard at the pictures to see which one has more contrast, so it's more visible when I'm playing live.
This is a good relative question from Mark Zeno in the chat. He's saying for him, it's all about creating an instrument. How does that apply in this kind of big monster case?
I agree completely with creating an instrument, and that's part of why, and I'm going to take the camera off here, so it's going to be shaky cam for a second.
You have your instrument and your live system, which is where I imagine you're going.
But that's also why I spent money to have this, and I hand-selected the wood for this gorgeous case that Jason Fink built for me. He's Mando Fink on Instagram, because I want to come into my studio and smile. I want to be inspired by instruments. So I went through 4 different fan covers to find the fan cover that aesthetically was most pleasing to me. I switched to these black countersunk screws because I thought they were nicer than the big silver ones that were on the original Monster frame. So yes, the aesthetics of the instrument do indeed matter to me, and I have made some choices here that are strictly aesthetic. But when it comes to the instrument, I don't want it to take me out of my creative flow. Is my main judgment.
I guess a related kind of question to that is, with your live system, and that's maybe something for a completely different stream and set of circumstances another day, you have a 12U system with some auxiliary bits that are the kind of smaller live setup. But with this big case, is it about having options to create more varied voices, or is it about having more going all at once? As people kind of answer each other and chat away in the live chat, there's questions of this kind of being you creating an orchestra in a case, maybe more so than a small system. So is that the approach?
Yes to all of the above.
You want every opportunity, I imagine, is the general approach.
Well, there's this case came. The primary reason I wanted to put this case together is as I was retiring from my job doing video and film work, where you're working with psychotic Hollywood producers and really high stress deadlines. I wanted to enjoy my life, and I said, "What made me happy? When am I my happiest?" And it's mucking with sound. And that's what started the idea back in 2015 of I'm going to give myself a modular again. Is I was seeing retirement on the horizon, and I said, I want to be happy. I want to muck with sound. So the idea behind this system was I want a playground where I can reach for anything and have it at my disposal just to play what if. Now, as time has gone on, I've become more interested in the second priority, which is, and I want to play 4 voices. That was just kind of an arbitrary number I picked early on. But I'm thinking more and more of having this playback compositions. That is another big factor for me and is actually having a big impact on my output section, which we'll talk about a few chats from now, is I also want to start composing with the system, so I needed to do multiple voices, preferably at once.
Yeah. There are a few questions that I'm seeing them go past. Kim may be watching the chat as well. We'll keep questions to specific parts of the case to specific streams, because after all the kind of technical difficulty we had a good hour back or so now, we're not going to get through note and trigger generation.
Oh, yes, we are. I am plowing through, sir.
I'm not sure how many will be with us by the end, but we...
And let's get back to talking about modules. We talked about grids earlier. This case is not for percussion. That's what my live case primarily is for, is percussion. But as we talked earlier, I really like that pointillistic style of having notes come in and out, not just on every even music division, but following musical patterns. So I have a grids in this case as well to trigger notes and events and to stagger sequences, just to get a rhythmic feel into the melodic content out of this case. So I'm putting a grids somewhat central in the case, but in the same area as my trigger and note modules, just so it can go ahead and go out to my various modulation modules, etc., to rhythmically control this whole system. So grids is one of the cornerstones of this case we talked about earlier. I have sitting right next to it a dual sample and hold, so that I can go ahead and take one of those rhythmic parts and take a smoothly varying random voltage from one of my modulation modules, which will go up here, and turn it into a rhythmic voltage based off of grids. That's why they're located next to each other.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite things, using patterns as opposed to steady clocks to trigger sample and hold, so that you get, it's much like randomly plucking, say, a string or hitting a drum, where every one is slightly different, but it's not a case of if a long note plays, you continue to hear this do beep boop boop beep boop boop beep kind of, the sample and hold randomness continues.
Yeah.
It's definitely a tip I'd say for anyone with sample and hold, is to use rhythmic sources in time with your patterns to trigger them rather than clock them. I think clocking on many sample and hold modules is misleading in that regard. People think, oh, I'll clock it, here's my clock of some division.
And for what it's worth, the Doepfer says trigger in instead.
Go Doepfer.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in knowing how much grids, because also looking a little further in the modular grid setup, are you also trying to utilize CVs from one sequencer and then the triggers from another place? Or do you see it much as one sequencer doing the job?
I will do that staggering. So the idea is to have everyone off of a central clock source. I'm going to be installing another sequencer and more clocking and clock dividers down here when we get to it, which we will get to. Trust me, we will get to it. But part of it is I want to have the sequence running. The 512 is very good at allowing me to have different note durations and rests. But then I also want to take other modulation voltages, trigger them rhythmically tied to the master tempo, but then if necessary, introducing the next modules I'm putting in, quantize those voltages if I want them to also generate other notes that are more random accents than the planned out sequences in the main sequencer.
That makes a lot of sense.
Branches.
I have this. Go
I was
ahead.
going to say branches has come up a couple of times in the chat. Is that something you've paired with grids?
I love branches type module. I happen to use the LATIC probability skipper because it has just a couple more features than branches does. But I do have a switch that I'm going to put in this system, and I use the probability skipper, which is similar to branches all the time in the live case. To go ahead and it gives me another way of thinning out patterns, bringing density back into patterns. So rather than having a 16th note hi-hat, I have it, just add a little bit of break and a little bit of feel to it just to make it more interesting. I don't want the brain to go, okay, I've got that. What else do you have for me? I want to keep the brain engaged with the music I create.
Holy cow, I need a wider monitor to see the case on modular grid. If you're on a Mac, I think it's Command and the minus key. I'm not sure about PC. You can keyboard shortcut zoom in and out. I had to do the same thing.
Yeah, it doesn't fit on my laptop.
Someone did mention earlier, they were very specific about the IntelliGel. I imagine they mean Tete or the Tetrapad, to get some controllers in that front row. How do you feel about interacting with this section of the case, the sequences themselves? Is that hands-on enough that you think, I don't need the controllers, or are you looking to add those in?
As we mentioned at the very top of the webcast when we were doing the Echoes from Hell, I've got this. Well, here, let me back up a little bit. That's sitting in front of this case. So I have wheels, knobs, sliders, XY, pads going through my MIDI to CV interface to give me all that control. I really appreciate the pressure points and brains. I also like the light wave light panels. Those are all really, really cool. I do like tactile control while I'm playing. And that's part of the reason also the sequencer came down here, is that this is a very playable sequencer with a button per step to go ahead and mute or skip steps on the fly. So I do perform while sequences are running. I've decided to go with an external MIDI controller just because it's a much denser way of me getting a lot of control into this case.
So,
go on, Kim.
Yeah, sorry. Because I remember in your live case, in your gigging case, you had a touch plate controller at some point.
I've had a touch controller in and out of there. I like having a touch controller in it, but I'm always looking for like another 2 or 4 HP. So sometimes it comes out.
Yeah, so having the controller out of the case to get more stuff in there. That makes sense.
I've been talking to other people about some other things I can add to the outside of my gigging case. Some touch pads on the wood on the outside, so where I could squeeze the case or do things like that to perform. We'll see where that goes.
A bit like the no modular cases.
Yeah. So I do have a couple quantizers in here as well. And I've been through a few quantizers. I'm not settled down on it. I really like the layout of the tip-top quantizer with the ability to mute and unmute individual notes. And I'll tell you why, is one of my dreams to do is not necessarily pick a scale, but to pick an interesting chord and then have different parts pop in and out playing notes of that chord, each rhythmically, but with a different rhythmic pattern. So it's been important to me to find things that will allow me to not just say, well, I'm always in this key or always in this scale, but to actually say, no, I want to pick just notes in a particular chord. So whenever pieces come in and out, they're forming bits of that chord in a very pointillistic fashion. So that's why I chose the tip top.
I really like that way of working. My last performance over in Seattle Upper Mountain, if DB Powerland's still in the chat, thanks for driving us up the second largest mountain in the USA with batteries and 12U of modular and facilitating that whole thing. It was amazing. But performing with the quantizer was the whole part of one of the specific patches, where whether it's a random sequence like a Turing machine or a quantized sequence that you may get out of the vector, it's nice to force that into some other kind of chordal tone. Very simply performing, if we had, say, let's just say a C minor chord, having just the note C play across varying octaves, and then adding, say, a C and a G, and then adding the flat in, and then thinking, all right, what other scale tones could I add? And working my way towards a full scale, and kind of tonal home for the piece, but then carving back out again. And also transposing that way live. If you had C, E flat and G, sorry to get music theory heavy for those that may be not interested, but you can take that C out and then the whole root comes up to that E flat, or you could put the D in between and bring that thing up. So that's a whole point for me. It's almost an odd thing to perform with, but I'm just going to just perform with this quantizer. It's a really nice way to perform. It's nice how Marbles carves the quantized scales out of itself that way as well. That does a good job.
And Marbles is going into this row next, and we'll talk a little bit about Marbles. But yeah, I have not had a chance to do a lot of composition this way, but this is mentally one of the things I want to do. Is I'm not as accomplished of a music writer or performer as some people, but I know what I want to do and can see as a painter how I want to form a piece. And that's one of the things I definitely want to try. So I've got, on the one hand, this very nice quantizer from Tip Top, but then just to throw a couple more quantizers in here, there's a nice Duo Q quantizer from Blue Lantern modules. Yeah. It's a black module, so it's throwing me off. But it's the Barton design, which gave me a couple more quantizers with some really nice options in a very small footprint. So that's why I added that in as well. But here is one of those things where you're going to wish you had sliding nuts. Is as I was trying to put these together, I can't push the bottom of the Blue Lantern module quantizer up against the bottom of the Tip Top. There's a gap there no matter how hard I push. And it took a while to figure this out.
Is it power cable? PCBs wider than the panel?
Let's see what we can do here. The circuit board is slightly offset from the front panel.
Okay.
So the circuit board on the left, let's see if I can get this to focus on this.
I've had a similar issue.
There we go. You see that circuit board extends beyond the left edge of the module.
I've had it where components have hung over, so a large capacitor actually went into the next module space and then shorted against one of the pins on an also, which luckily nothing broke, but not a nice issue. Nice question from Mark again in the chat, from Mark Zeno. Let me just scroll back up to that one.
Hey, Mark.
He's saying very little modular computers in the system. Do you not like OLED mini screens, menu diving, and is it much preferring a one knob per function? Or are you trying to find a balance?
If I wanted to do that, I'd use a computer.
Okay.
And I'm not against a computer. I performed and composed using a computer and live for a very long time, and I intend to get back to it. But the modular is for me to be very tactile and flat and to make decisions quickly. And if I want to drill down, if I wanted a module that required a menu or much menu, and there's exceptions like the vector sequencer, then I would just use the software version of it.
Yeah.
Because it's a better UI than trying to do it here.
And would you go expert sleepers in that situation, maybe? You just have a laptop control the system?
Yeah. So these two modules I cannot get next to each other because the circuit board on the Tip Top also comes right to the very edge of the module. Let me get it down in my camera here. It's weird watching this on delay. Here we go.
Tim Cunnell says, file down the PCB, you might get away with it.
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could just bend it, but I can't because the jacks are mounted to it that way.
Yeah.
I think he just made a mistake. But fortunately, the module it's going to go next to, let's see if I'm fortunate or not. A Marbles, the circuit board is at a different height than the circuit board on the Tip Top, so I can get them right next to each other. So I'm just going to have to swap around the location of these modules compared to modular grid. And they just about fit.
This seems to be one of the annoying problems, that you actually worked out the layout of your case, how you place your modules, and then stuff like this comes in the way.
And unexpected. I mean, I've had other problems where with my gigging case, the IntelliGel power supply in the bottom half has a riser in the middle. And that gets in the way of some modules. And there's power inlets on the edges of it that intrude into the module space. And I've had to move some modules strictly based on physical things about the power supply, which are, it's there, but not here. And it just drives me nuts.
Hi Z in the chat. I can't at you because your username's a single character, so I can't at Z to actually reply and tag you in the chat. Yeah, my mic's hard left. You may know the issue. We're going to try and fix this for next time. Super quick. I'm coming into my interface on channel 1, microphone straight in, and OBS, the streaming software, is set to see that interface, and then that interface is what's streaming out with Chris and Kim coming in through Skype. I can't pan it. There is a pan in OBS, but it pans across the silence as if it's seeing 1 and 2 as stereo, even though I'm just using one like a mono channel. Any tips are totally welcome on that. Yeah, so the rails, I was going to say the rails are flapping around like crazy, but you've already explained they're not tight.
Yeah, that's a feature, not a bug.
Some comments on 2HP modules protruding off to the side of their power connectors. I mean, anything that small, it's tricky to fit power on.
Yeah, the Pico are friendlier in that regard.
Yeah, the additional third of panel space does make a difference.
So the last thing I'm going to be putting in this particular row is a marbles, and we talked about that briefly. Because I think the marbles is brilliant. It really bridges randomness with planning. That you've got these gates on the left side, these different patterns, and you can decide whether or not they're just divisions or they're kind of rhythmic drum patterns, etc. But that they're linked to these random stepped voltages, or they can be smooth voltages, on the right side. Whenever a gate changes on the left, its corresponding voltage changes on the right. So that works out really well in terms of me having more rhythmic changes in my system. Not necessarily a note, but maybe a filter cutoff or another parameter changing on its own rhythm pattern associated with everybody else, but off of the same central clock. So I love marbles. It took me a while to get my head wrapped around it, but there's just some beautiful things in it, such as we were talking about the quantizer built into it. The way that she's done the spread to where on one extreme, it's just going to give you the center voltage. As you start increasing the spread, it's going to start widening out the range of notes you're going to get around that center until you're at the top, and then you're going to get the full range of voltages. But then as you push spread further, it's going to actually start pushing the note selection out towards the edges to the highest and lowest notes until you just get high and low octaves with the spread all the way turned around. So aside from that being interesting from notes, even if you're controlling something like a filter cutoff or the start point, playing back a sample in a granular sample player, etc., it's really fun to say, I'm starting then just get all over the place and push it further to where it's just high and low extremes. It's that a level of thought is what really attracts me to a lot of the immutable instrument modules, and it makes it very playable and fun to do live.
Just the fact that that distribution is very kind of Buchla source of uncertainty. You've got the Turing machine style looping that's also expanded. You've got branches-like functionality, grids-like functionality, that carving of the musical scales on the stepped outputs. It's very, very well thought out marbles. Very, very impressive module. Yeah. I figured, thanks Mark, he was actually talking to the live chat saying that people watching just take your mixers into mono and it will stop this issue of me being on the left-hand side in this stream. That would fix what I'm doing. If I can go into a mixer first, which I realise I've only got another big mixer, which is a pain, I could come into channels 1 and 2 into this streaming software. So what I'm going to do next time is use the Bafaco instrument interface and go into the modular. And I may just run clouds over the mic for the duration. But I will go through my modular system and force OBS to do as it's told. Modular to the rescue.
That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, that's the right way to do it. I may have some fun. I may set up the 16N fader bank just here where you can't see what I'm doing and squirrel away with some effects. That could be fun next time. You're getting somewhere, Chris, but we are, not to close off immediately or anything, we're heading to the 2-hour mark we wanted to hit. Yeah. I'm very happy to keep going, mainly because of all the technical issues that we had.
I think to save time, I'm not going to actually screw these in. I'm going to leave them sitting on the rails and just try to go through the last row somewhat quickly. But I thought it was time for our first smoke test to see if I put anything in backwards.
Ooh, someone want to hit us with the stats? I said 1, you said 2.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm keeping an eye on not just smoke, but the LEDs on the bus boards to see whether or not they come up. And they're all up. And there's my modules. So round 1, nobody fried.
I said I'm...
Smells good?
Chicken smells good. I said one module over the whole system. I don't think one in this stream.
Yeah, the whole thing, right.
Yeah. And
you still have your chance.
Yeah, what about you, Kim? Was the 2 fried modules the whole thing?
Oh, I can say the 2 was for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. All right.
I trust Chris.
We'll try to be more concentrated about what's left here.
Well, this is the real...
There's been a lot of questions about...
Sorry.
CV
Yeah,
gate.
this is the real valuable part of the chat, is that what's led to these choices and how these work together and why there's a sample and hold next to CV sources, why use a drum pattern-based generator but for pitched musical information. So it's definitely we should continue down this path, and we'll leave you with a screwdriver maybe.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do the mechanical bit later on, particularly since I need to get my magnets to be able to fish out any that I drop. That's the reason I'm doing this bottom row first also. So when I drop screws down, they hopefully bounce off the front of the modules, not into the power supply.
Yes, and considering the open ports for mains in that thing.
Yeah, so someone's saying, oh, is anyone doing soldering? I said, I'm going to do some arc welding if something gets shorted out here.
Do you find yourself covering some of the modules you've already inserted? It's just to not scratch them or whatever. Would you go higher in the case? Would you do that?
I'm not that precious. I should. But, you know, I talk a good game, but really I'm a bull in a china shop.
I'm going to pull up the image very briefly just to kind of run down where we've got to from modular grid, and then we'll return back to Chris getting these in the system. So what we're looking at in this stream was notes and trigger generators, and we're going to spread this across 4 streams tonight, Saturday, Wednesday, and the following Saturday. This bottom left-hand corner that you can see on screen from Modular Grid, there is a Modular Grid link in the description and the live chat. I'll make sure they're there and pop it back in a second. So we've got the 512 sequencer, marbles, quantizer, blue lantern quantizer, sample and hold and grids. There's still a lot of sequencing and control to come in that bottom row. So we'll move back over to Chris and let you get some more modules in.
Yeah. The next thing I want to put in down this bottom row is my CV to gate stuff. And I went with the Expert Sleepers fader host stuff because it allowed me just to keep expanding how many channels I had. My controller keyboard has so many surfaces on it. I wanted to be able to bring those out to separate CVs or gates. So I've got right now the FH1, which is what I had been using and which I've written some custom scripts for.
Okay.
I'm going to get that working, and then I'm going to switch over to an FH2 because it's even more powerful and has a display. But this gives me 24 CVs and gates, so I can get a lot out of that keyboard now.
Yeah, oh yeah. How are you, will you run the keyboard as a master? We spoke earlier on that has some very nice rhythmic arpeggiator functionality. Will you be running that as the master, or will you ever slave the MIDI gear?
I want to run it as a slave. Previous attempts at that were not successful, but I'm hoping that time heals all, and that when I go back and tackle it again, that I'll have more success. But I want it to be a slave because I want the vector to be central in this case, and ultimately for this case to be externally clocked from something else. So everyone's got to be able to be a follower, not a leader in this case.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Dim Leafall needs to leave. He said thank you very much to us all for the stream. Do join us again on Saturday for anyone that's just checking in. No technical issues, fingers crossed. I think we know what we're doing now, or I know what I'm doing. I have another stream on Friday at 8 p.m. UK time with a new module that I don't think you can see, but I've covered it with some paper in hope that someone went wild for trying to find out what it is.
We have X-ray vision.
Yeah. So Friday, 8 p.m. UK time, brand new module with someone that we'll be talking about. There'll be a demo earlier that day. And do join us on Saturday for those that can't stick around any longer than planned today. Chris will have notes and triggers all screwed in, working, and we'll move on to the next section. But for now, we'll keep going.
And for that matter, this will be stored on YouTube for people to play back later so they can join us later and see how it ended.
Yeah, you skip ahead another time.
I do like the Expert Sleepers FH1 and FH2 because they allow me to set jumpers for every CV output, whether or not it's unipolar, bipolar, what his voltage range is. So I can really customize things such as maybe aftertouch is just positive voltage, for example. But on the other hand, velocity I actually have is bipolar. So a soft note is actually a negative voltage and a hard note is a positive voltage. That way I can set up a patch, add velocity, and it's going to be a variation on what I've already set up. So I love the flexibility of the Expert Sleepers. One crazy thing is that it needs a power cable for every expander in addition to the home module.
Yeah.
And you'll notice this little different power cable here. Modular ADDAC makes these thicker gauge power cables, which are kind of interesting. They're not horribly expensive either. I did test these to see if they reduced any noise in my system, and frankly, they did not. But when I was talking to Paul Schreiber, who's of synthesis technology, a real king on power, he said, when you have a module that's drawing more than 100 milliamps, it wouldn't hurt to have the heavier gauge wire on it. So whenever I have a module in here that's pulling over 100 milliamps, or if I have a particularly long run, I'm going to use the modular ADDAC higher gauge power cables just to make sure. If I'm going to spend all this time, I might as well do it right.
Well, when it's not much more money or effort, just that extra additional safety net, I think, is wise in that case.
Yeah. And, power cables have become like IEC power cables. Where did all these come from? I have a bin full of them now.
Yeah.
Where are all these modules these cables belonged to at some point in their life? So I need to plug in the power cable for each of the expanders. And things are a little tight down here with my foam filter for my air inlet. But here we go. And I'm just going to set these in here loosely for now. And I'll do the screws on them later. And because the rails, you might notice I'm using some force to get these in. That's because the rails do need to be kind of shoved into the position in the right angle for these modules to fit. There we go.
So Chris, I'm actually curious about, you talked about screens and being able to see what's going on. I mean, these modules, how do you keep track of what's going where in the outputs?
In the case of the FH1, and I'll carry this over when I move to the FH2, is I have decided ahead of time what my mapping is going to be from my controller keyboard to these jacks. And the strength and curse of the FH1 is for that to happen, you have to write a script, a text thing that says what maps to what. So I spend a lot of time working on that text, on that script to map my controllers to these, but then I leave it alone. And I know that jack is always that knob or that slider. That's why there are 24 of them here, so I don't have to change what they do.
So you have a little manual by the side to remember all 24 outputs.
It's somewhat logical visually in terms of rows of knobs and sliders and things like that. But I'll use the system for a while, so I'll probably have a little cheat sheet here at the side reminding me till I get it in my head again.
Okay, you're not superhuman after all. That's good to know.
There's just too much stuff floating around in my head.
That's my main problem sometimes. I have this where you put small labels. You can put labels. I so much want sometimes to put labels on the modules just to remember what's going in and out. But that's the charm of modular, I guess.
So in addition to having the CV gate here from the keyboard, which has a nice arpeggiator, I also do have a WMD architect because I also like the way you can set up different scales, add to or subtract from notes. It's a very flexible arpeggiator module. And I also have its triad add-on so they can go ahead and form simple triads, very simple chords, to go trigger other oscillators to do something more interesting. The feature I do not like about this module, and it's a curse in some modules, is that it only deals with positive voltages. It thinks that the lowest pitch in the world is 0 volts and goes up from there. And most of my system is arranged on the idea that middle C is 0 volts. I find that makes it easier to tune oscillators because I'm either going negative or positive. I'm not stretching or contracting the entire scale. When I'm doing little offsets for position, it makes sense for me for middle C to be 0. But some of my oscillators and the architect don't follow that. They start at 0 volts. So next to the architect, I have an ALM Beast chalkboard, which is one of those precision adders that can add or subtract octaves. And aside from being a cool performance tool to change octaves on the fly, it's sitting here just to translate for the architect. It's going to take my CV from my keyboard, shove it up 2 volts, which will now be the low C on my keyboard, shoved up to 0 volts, run it through the architect, put it back into the second stage, pull it back down again by 2 volts, and then I'll send it out to the rest of the system.
I love Beast Chalkboard. I like playing a rotary switch because there's somewhat an uncertainty to when exactly it's going to switch. If a physical push up, back and forward or button, you can be very definitive in time with when you perform some kind of change in function, such as an octave shift. Rotating a switch, there's of course a lot of mechanical kind of push back from the thing because it's not a loose knob, but it's somehow that bit looser. Some of Colin Bender's older streams, he would be riding kind of filter cutoff in one hand and octave switch on the Macbeth oscillators in the other. And I love that kind of tripping up and down of the octaves as you're just kind of, bobbing away in front of the system.
Yeah, I agree. I think I like the physicality of live performance. I like there to be some resistance in the controls rather than being you breathe on it and it moves. And when I worked at places like Roland in my old days, I even advocated that foot pedals should have really heavy springs on them so that rather than having to delicately balance on one foot and just move the pedal to just the right point, I felt it should give you resistance so you're digging into it like you're digging into a whammy bar on a guitar, etc.
Yeah, you can. I think you can be much more kind of purposeful and accurate generally, because when you've got to be so careful, it's hard to physically be so soft with some of these things, especially with your foot. With the weight of your leg above it. It's not the easiest thing on some kind of loose expression pedals I've played and wah pedals and things like that. So I'd agree.
You have to balance on one foot while you're also trying to play. It's like being a circus animal. It's crazy.
Yeah. Unless you're Steve Vai and you get the band to hold you up while you do 2 pedals in 2 feet, which is a whole other ball game.
You're saying I need to play with more people rather than doing this solo?
Well, more people that will hold you up while you do double foot expression under the desk.
But Chris, that's why your gigging cases, maybe that's easier to navigate because you're mainly using that for drums, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can, and that's why it has like contact microphones on it, so I can strike the case to trigger stuff.
That's a one-man band, almost.
We were talking about buffered mults earlier. Mults are another thing throughout your system. I put buffered mults by my oscillators because that's what needs them the most.
Yeah.
And frankly, I just use splitter cables for anything other than pitch to CV stuff because I don't want to take up module space. You'll see when we get to oscillators, I've got a system of how I distribute my voltages to all my oscillators, but I'm throwing a spare buffered mult module in here. In this case, it's an IntelliGel BM next to the arpeggiator and the note outputs just so I can split off some voltages right here. There we go.
So Chris, do you swear by buffered mults, or do you have some passive ones here and there?
I don't have any passive mults in this case. In my gigging case, I have some passive mults to split gates and triggers, mainly so I can leave stuff pre-patched and close the lid.
That makes sense.
Mark in the chat says...
All right, it's time for another smoke test. I'm about to cover up the LEDs, so let's see. And it looks good so far.
Yep, all good so far.
All right.
Mark mentions tip-top cables as well. Yeah, for me, for passive mults, I tend to just use stacking cables as opposed to actually take up HP.
Yeah. And the reason I'm testing so often, by the way, is I have done the thing of like, let's put all the modules in the case, turn on the power, and you smell smoke, but you have no idea where it's coming from. And I've had it in this case where I fried a quadra expander, and I'm like pulling modules out and sniffing to try to figure out where the smell was the strongest. so I could find the module.
Troubleshooting's horrible. I really feel sorry for companies that have to deal with issues that are formed from things that are out of their control, power supplies, bus boards, other modules kicking noise back into systems. Because it's often the last thing you put in, you think that's what's causing the issue. And that's how much I wondered if you'd run into that with this system, but they're probably not with the power solution you've got, where one thing goes in and seemingly that's the kind of culprit for the issue that you're having, but it's rarely the case, I find.
Well, we'll find out with this system. It should be pretty well isolated with all those bus boards, etc. The power supplies are very good about shutting themselves down if they see something shorted out. Basically, the more expensive the power supply, the smarter it is, and the more it protects you from yourself. Cheap power supplies, they're just like, I'm trying. I know it's shorted out, but I'm trying, and your things go up in smoke.
Right, okay. Well worth paying for the protection of it.
Yeah. I'm not going to put this module in right this second, but we were talking about sequencers. I do have a Renee, and it is the original Renee. And honestly, I've barely gotten into it. But I already have normal sequencers. I had a pair of Doepfer A16345 systems previously, and now I have the Vector. And I got the Renee just because I wanted, one, to have a different approach to sequencing, just to put my brain in a different place. But two, to team up with, it's off camera. Let me switch over here to a wider view. To team up with grids. Because I wanted to experiment with the idea of one of the patterns out of grids clocking X and a different pattern out of grids clocking Y to create these variations on a 16-note sequence I created. So all the notes are there, but the way we're going through them has this change in this rhythmic character to it.
I see Matt Hodson's in the chat. He also put a Mark I Rennie in a system recently, I saw. Today, in fact.
I mean, Mark II is very cool, but now you're in the third dimension and you've got more of a UI where you need to dive in. And that crossed the line for me to becoming less immediate. I might as well go do that in the sequencer in software. This is immediate enough for me that I'm pleased with it.
Okay, we're getting towards fleshing out this note and trigger section. Of course, it's not all plugged in, but...
I'm not putting this one in yet because it would cover up the rest of my bus board. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to plug in power. So that's going to go in last. And I'll do all the screwing later.
Do you ever let the modules hang by their cable like they're hanging on for dear life?
All the time. It's terrible.
I've seen people go wild over seeing that, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, particularly, in general, I like the ergonomics of the Monster frame because it has this nice arc. It goes from flat down here, and I can keep a nice visual angle. But the problem is that the top couple rows on it overhang. And if you just put a module in there and you realize the screwdriver's across the room,
yeah, it's out.
Things are going to fall. Things are going to dangle.
Yeah. Hello to everyone joining the chat. We seem to have a, I don't know if it's kind of kids in bed and then joining the chat across Europe at this time. But yeah, good injection of new people in the chat. I know I'm panned hard left. Welcome to say it. It's not for me an annoying thing that it keeps coming up. Something we'll fix for next time when we stream again on Saturday.
Yeah, next time we're going to put Kim hard right.
Oh no.
And try and ping pong.
That was not a political reference,
and ping
by the way.
pong the delay between that we had earlier between.
Oh
you both.
yeah, hey, smooth random voltage to the pan circuit. Ah, I love that. Anyway, I'm moving now into like clocking and logic to finish off this row. I've had the quad clock distributor for ages, and I just happen to like it. I like having the immediacy of the knob going to specific divisions, so I can see exactly what I'm doing with a click and to tune something in. Things that are a bit softer, like a continuous control, where you think, oh, I think that's divide by 6 now. It kind of takes it's a problem live.
Do they actually click? Are they not fully variable knobs?
They're not fully variable. They are indented to these different places.
Well,
the gate pulse width, the trigger delay, and we already talked about trigger delays, does have a center detent, but the dividers do actually click to each of those divisions. So you have a very positive feel as to exactly what division you're going to.
Super useful.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. Now, I'll tell you something. We're going to get back into power here for a second. Most of my case is plus minus 12, but I have a few things that need plus 5. I'll give users a little tip here. If you see this type of connector, the skinny 10-pin connector, or the 10-wire cable, this module does not have plus 5. You're okay with just plus or minus 12.
Yeah.
But when you get a module that has the full width 16-pin, it may have plus 5. So if you're trying to figure out which of your modules require plus 5, the first thing to look for is the cable that came with it. That'll be the first hint as to what sort of power you might need off of this thing.
Yeah, and some things like the Mordax data give you the option of pulling 5 off the bus board or having it condition power itself from plus 12 on a jumper on the back.
And when you have that option, by the way, I always choose to take off of plus 5 if I can, because 5 volts is typically connected to a processor, which is typically putting a lot of digital noise and hash onto that power line. And if you're not going to take that over onto like your plus 12 line, you might be introducing noise in your system.
Yeah.
So what I mentioned earlier, I like the Clavis no drains to provide plus 5 in my system because 1, they use the brand new generation LDO chips, very nicely filtered. And 2, they take the plus 5 from the minus 12, which typically has a lot less current draw and you have more headroom in most cases on the minus 12.
I didn't know it did that from the minus. They're all plus, and then as you say, you end up with that.
They're all plus the stuff for the Clavis. He's a very clever guy.
Very good.
Now, in this row, the only module that needs plus 5 is the quad clock distributor. So I do have a Clavis no drain on this lib just for these local modules.
So these seem very flexible in contrast to something like a fixed clock divider or multiplier. Is that the reason, the flexibility, the quick tweaking?
Yeah, I like the flexibility. It's very smart about resetting. Some dividers think a reset means everything goes off instead of everything going on the downbeat. That's a big problem. And I also just wanted the chance to play with polyrhythms, to go to unusual divisions. It's another reason I like the 4MS DLD as well, is having individual divisions that are not necessarily quarter notes, 16th notes, 8th notes, whatever. So I can go off of the grid a little bit and have some fun. So yeah, that's the reason I have this module. I like it because it's flexible. It does jitter a bit. It does have a little bit of problem with jitter in the clock, but other than that, it's pretty good.
It's come up again how many people have fried a module in the chat. Matt was asking. Mark says he's more worried about your life than the module, Chris. All this open mains at the minute and the bus bars and things.
If you see any lights on the bus boards and you see me reaching into the case, yell.
Right, noted. Live chat, don't bother, because by that point he's had a good 20 to 60 seconds of hit from that thing, and, and you're too far behind on the stream.
My life is in your hands.
Me and Kim will watch.
Well, on the third stream, you might not get, you might not be so focused. You might be tired at that time. We'll see.
I'm just looking at where I cross over my center line here. And when I start plugging to the other bus boards, I got plenty of room. So the one other thing I'm going to put down this row is I do also like having sequential switches. It used to be the way we used to have to patch ratcheting. Now a lot of sequencers have it built in. But it's also fun to do all sorts of hocketing tricks where you alternate a gate between two different channels or more than that for different instruments, simulate up pick, down pick, simulate left and right bongos. I just love having a switch in my system that allows me to take a gate and then spread it between other outputs. I've played with a few of them. I had a LADDAC for a while that I really liked, but occasionally it would miss a clock coming into it unless I used a trigger delay to expand the width of the clock coming into it. I've tried to blow up the STG Sound Labs one, and I cannot get it to drop a clock. It's always dead on. And it has all the divisions available at once on separate jacks, rather than choose. Also look like a great solution.
Yeah, nice that they tacked on effectively offset generators that turn it into a sequencer. Some nice merging of steps, and yeah, the tree from Mystic Circuits as well is definitely one worth a look for people wanting sequential switches.
Oh, that's good to know. I wasn't aware of that one.
Yeah, very powerful thing. You can jump back and forward multiple steps at once with gates that are active while gates are high, and then as the gate drops, it reverts back to where it was, which you can continually clock and be kind of intelligently in front by a certain amount of steps and pull back and forward. Great with this idea of using accents out of grids to musically shift other non-rhythmic things around, pitch information and things.
Yeah. I was just measuring how much space I need for Renee when I put it in. Yeah, it looks like now I'm past the halfway point, and they'll go over to the other bus board. So it's safe for me to go ahead and plug Renee in at this point.
But I'm curious, Chris. You mentioned using CV for like modulating stuff, like on rhythmical notes or whatever. Do you also use triggers to like panning or whatever, like specific things other than notes?
I'll use the triggers for a couple of things. One would be, in the case of using a switch to alternate between, say, two different envelope generators or triggering two different voice chains. But also, it's another thing to go ahead and clock a sample and hold with. So why I have a lot of rhythmic stuff in this case is to switch voltages rhythmically.
Mm-hmm.
But only voltages for like modulation and notes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add in a couple samplers to this case as well, so I could trigger percussion that way out of this case. So I'm not locking out any percussive triggering in this case, but I'm focusing a lot on creating very, hopefully interesting, evolving control voltage streams, so that anything from drones to Steve Roach multi-layered sequences are a bit more mesmerizing than just having one thing going continuously.
We'll look forward to that.
So do I.
Yeah, Mark Zeno did ask earlier, we're going to get a patch at the end of this, and I thought, yeah, we're a long way from getting a
Yeah, we're a long way from that. But I'm down to the last 3 modules for today, so we're really close.
Yeah.
Logic. I am a big fan of having logic in the case, and Kim is to credit for that. I wasn't paying much attention to logic modules. I occasionally use them for things like doing some interesting keyboard tricks on whether or not they transpose sequences and all this jazz. But I've really gotten into using logic modules to create, again, more interesting patterns, to combine patterns, to have one pattern hold out another pattern, etc. So now logic is a staple of my systems, both the gigging case and this live case. Excuse me, the studio case. In the live performance case, I have a logic object from ADDAC module, because it's very immediate. There's 2 ands, there's 2 ors, there's an inverter, there's 2 flip-flops. It's not every possible logic function in the world, but it's the ones that I need, and it's just a dedicated jack for everything. That's why that's in the live case, very immediate feedback. For this case, which is much more thoughtful compositionally, I put IntelliGel plug in it because it has far more options, NORs, XORs, NANDs, XNORs, etc., that I can go ahead and dial in using these controls and have 2 channels of that. Fiddly live, but it gives me more options in the studio case where I'm being more thoughtful.
Well, we're talking about the initial kind of start of the case. I think Mark has clarified in the chat what he meant with the voltage standards. He's saying, could you communicate with Buchla or Korg in this system? Buchla is 1.2 volts per octave instead of a volt per octave, for example.
Yes, I can. For example, those functions are built into distings, and I will have distings in this case.
Okay.
So they do have a linear log converter, and they do have the Buchla converter as well. And I can't remember, but I think that might have been an option on the FH2 to do the Buchla scale as well. So yes, I can do that translation. The other equipment that I have right now, the vintage gear, is 1 volt per octave as opposed to linear. Although that said, I still have a Korg MS02 lin to log converter. Okay, you've sent me off on this tangent now. One thing we have in the closet is my wife is also a musician. She used to play in a band in Dublin called Blue Movies back in the 80s, keyboardist. And we still have her Yamaha CS30.
Ooh.
And that is also linear.
Yes.
So I held onto my Korg MS02 so that we could interface her CS30 with my modular gear.
Matthew Shaw has a CS30, and he brought it to a recent well, not recent because we're all in lockdown, but the last Modular Meet event back in February. It amazes me there's no clock input for the sequencer on that thing. There's a push button to move forward a step, and it will run internally, but you cannot clock it, yet there's a sequencer. Really strange.
That's soul crushing. Yes, I agree.
It's a hell of a keyboard, though. Very much like a switched modular style environment for a more comprehensive single voice or dual voice. I'd like a CS30. That whole CS range just sits in a mix beautifully as well. CS15's out too expensive if people want vintage synths.
Yeah.
Really lovely in a mix.
Well, Trish has talked about parting with her CS30 eventually, so I'll keep you in mind, Ben. It seems silly to have brought it back from England when she used to work at Music Maker Publications to the US and ship it back there. And I spent a half hour in interrogation in London Heathrow Airport shipping that device. When I tried to go through it, it went through the X-ray and they were just like, follow me. And Trish didn't even know where I went. I just disappeared behind a door.
Oh, okay.
And it was a half hour and had to take it out of the case and all the broke a slider, putting it back into this packing. But it's refurbished and happy now.
Very nice.
Let's finish this row off. Let's finish today's thing off. Plug is great, but it does not have inverters, which I need quite often, because sometimes rather than triggering something, you want to hold something out. So you might need to invert the level of a gate or signal. And you always need OR gates. ORs are simple combiners. If this is on, or if that's on, turn it on. So I have a simple passive OR from IntelliGel that goes in here. And I have a Circuit Abbey NV, which is just a trio of inverters. I'm shocked how hard it is to find inverters in Logic modules. That's why I have a Logic Ogic in my portable case. It has an inverter, and I need one. So I've tracked down a rare Verti from the Circuit Abbey just so I could add inverters and finish off the Logic portion of this case.
I snagged an old IntelliGel quad inverter as soon as I saw one early on, many moons ago.
All right, final smoke test of the day. We got all the modules in for today. Oh, please don't prove me wrong now. Everything is looking good. Come on. Oh, yep, and Renee's up as well. Good. So, that's today's modules.
We got there. And in less than 30 minutes,
I knew we
with
would.
a delay beyond what we thought we were going to do, with a hell of a lot more than 30 minutes of technical issue, that's quite an achievement. So just to reiterate for those that joined us late, this idea was that filling this monster system and feeding the monster, of course, is a lovely title, but it is an ADDAC or ADDAC system monster case. Earlier in the video, if you want to go back, well, this video sits live on YouTube. We did go over power, lots of information from Chris there. But we decided to split this long, what could be one huge long stream of filling up a case, into 4 sections. Today being power, general thoughts and intentions, and notes and trigger generators. So not that we're leaving immediately, but what will be the stream on Saturday? Chris, what's the next section of the case?
Saturday, we're moving up to these rows in the case, and they're going to be my oscillators. And I have kind of divided them more or less to an analog row, a digital row, a strange beast row, etc. And if we have time, and who knows if we're going to work out, I also have a row of different wave folders, wave shapers, etc. that I put in between the oscillators, because this is part of the patching scheme, as I figure the oscillators might want to go into the various wave folding, etc. type modules before going to a mixer. And in the center of the case is a grand central station mixing section to it.
So questions about any of those. I've just put the modular grid link in the live chat again, for anyone that would like to have a look around. Again, get your questions ready. But where would be a good point if people want to reach you between now and Saturday, Chris, for anything specifically? Have you got a kind of space you like to live in, or is that space purely going to be getting this system sorted out?
I've been living primarily, and go ahead and take me off the feed. I'm going to switch over to my desktop camera, so take me.
Okay.
So I've been rebuilding the Learning Modular website to actually have a new training section. So in addition to Facebook, where I hang out on the Learning Modular page on Facebook, I do have a contact form at the bottom of every page on the learningmodular.com website. And my crowning achievement this past week, beyond working on this modular, is I have a new online training site up. It's linked to from the main site, but if you want to go directly there, it's courses.learningmodular.com. It includes a free course of movies I created to complement Patch and Tweak, the book that Kim and I co-wrote. This is basic concepts of synthesis, but I've added a couple more courses as well. And since you, hardy souls, have stuck out the webcast this long, if you enter the coupon code MONSTER, all caps, you'll get 25% off any course through the rest of this month. So contact form on my website, Learning Modular, or courses.learning modular, or I'm on my Facebook page a lot too.
I'm just pulling up some browser images for those.
Thank you.
Patreon has been a great place as well to actually support you on there. In terms of seeing this journey through this power system, there's a lot of exclusive posts on there that have ran down what's led to this setup and kind of experiments, tests, screenshots of all the measurements you've been making. So I would say your Patreon page is a good place for people as well.
Yeah, there's two threads on the patreon.com/learning modular page. One thread was about me testing noise in Eurorack, where I went through bus boards and widgets you add onto things and all sorts of stuff to see what lowered power in my system. So that's one string of posts on my Patreon page. And then also I've started a new string of posts called the Monster Power. And that's been my joys and my pitfalls of trying to install this big power system. And a little secret, you can join my Patreon stream for as little as $1 and see a lot of posts. The videos and access to my courses, you need to pay, $5 a month, one coffee a month. I know how much Kim loves his coffee, so I might be too high of a price to ask. Although I'm just joking with Kim because he's also one of my supporters, as are you, and I appreciate you both greatly, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of information on Patreon. That's where I do all my long form stuff. All my, okay, let's dive deep into the weeds, that goes into Patreon.
We're basically, by supporting each other, just choosing to pay Patreon a fee for content we could just share with each other. But I do...
Well, I run this as a business.
Yeah.
Anything that goes into there has to come from money made from music. Mm-hmm. So that's a discipline in terms of what modules I'm buying and what I'm spending, but it's also the reason why I do a lot of stuff like Patreon and the courses, is that feeds my ability to do music, and then I turn around and take everything I learned doing music and feed it back out through those channels.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to share, because you told me, Kim, the other day we were testing and it didn't hiccup like it did earlier, that there's now a hell of a lot of the books, Patch and Tweak, Push Turn Move and Pedal Crush, up there as well. I want to bring a bit of that up entirely for free on, what's the web link for that one, Kim?
I can put it in the chat. It's on bukes.com.
Let me...
Yeah, that's a great PDF. It gives you a great sampler of the various... You can see not just how gorgeous they are, and Kim's just a fantastic visual designer, but there's actual content in there as well.
Exactly. Give a good taste of what's in there, and especially how dense the pages in Patch and Tweak are, like when Chris is talking. There's so much great information. I just have to say also, Chris's courses is the reason I contacted him. I mean, to make Patch and Tweak. There's so much great knowledge in those courses. I highly recommend them.
You should have, Kim, moderator right to post the link. Yes, it's come up.
I think I posted it, yeah.
Yeah. The reason I've been sharing this around a few people, of course, kind of encourage them to get the books that I enjoy, but there's a lot in there. As we say, it's not just, here's 5 pages and a buy link. And we want your email.
They're not just picture books. I mean, although Kim has just done a fabulous job visually in these books, Kim has reached out to people like Knobs and myself to okay, let's get down and give you the stuff you need to know about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're kind of rounding off. I'm not in a huge rush to go, so people do ask questions in the chat if you wish. A couple of things I'd like to point out if I pull back over to my browser. There's a nice new oscillator, the WFM from LA67, based on the COBOL waveform shaping. VCA on there and the AM synthesis and then audio rate wave morphing together is really, really nice. You should go check that out if nothing else. And if you don't get that module, do try and patch that elsewhere. Try and take the video as a series of tips that you can apply to your system, because AM mixed with some waveform morphing is really cool. And I imagine something you've got plenty of in the setup as we get through to those kind of modules, Chris. Another video to check out that went live yesterday, the dual ADSR from Soundforce. I like to call it the ADSR and kitchen sink of envelope generators. CV over everything, end of stages, cycling switches, switches for which end of output you can use, just a ton in there. And as always, I try and make the videos, certainly with this timing index that you can see, all about you being able to apply a load of patch tips and tricks as I keep learning and trying to share all these ideas as well. Chaining outputs and using them like gate delays was a fun one. One more thing as well while we're here. Beat People are streaming in around 3 hours. Corey, Ken are going to be joined by ASM's Glenn Darcy and Dominic around 7 PST, I think. It says live in 3 hours from now. I will drop this link in the live chat and people can go join. And one final thing, head to bit.ly/Corona streams, which I'm updating daily, for a list of streams. The amount of people that have been in this chat, the amount of people I've seen additionally in things like Sonic Talk, Jamie from GeoSim streams, Colin Bender's daily streams. There's great support and engagement at the minute where we're all isolating and things are difficult. So I'm trying to keep this resource going, which relies me updating it, and of course people using it as well. But there's a ton on there to go join. Joe Caputo's Voltage Control Lab Spring Break has been a fun one, Monday through Saturday, doing different patch challenges. So do go check that out too. I'll put all these links in the description. That kind of throws all my bits out there, but I'm in no huge rush to go, so I'd like to just open it to the live chat. Any particular questions on anything we've done today? In terms of module choices beyond note triggers and power, it would be good to keep those for the following streams, but fire away.
Yeah, I've managed to go over to the computer now where I can start answering some live chat directly, but yeah, feel free to answer any questions or I'm curious, you two, to go ahead and now critique those modules I've chosen. I'm sure there's some things you would have done differently.
Let me pull
Chris,
the...
yeah, there's one question from Ed Random. I don't know if you've seen that.
I have not.
115 volts, 50 hertz, and differences compared to using 230 volts, 60 hertz in Europe.
It only moves which note the hum is.
50 to 60 hertz, and that's it.
The bigger challenge is that each switching power supply model and brand may put out noise at different frequencies. Some of them, the noise is up a few megahertz, so you're not really going to be able to sample that into your DAW. It's not an issue. But in some cases, that noise is, I've seen it as low as 15K, which definitely does get into your audio signal. So choice of switching power supply and the noise that creates has a much bigger impact than the mains current, depending which country you're in.
Great answer.
I'm looking through the live chat. In terms of critiquing the system, Chris, you keep disappearing on Skype. I'm not sure why, if you're moving camera or something else.
I'm also watching YouTube at the same time, so I should get out of that.
Yeah, Skype doesn't like it. We've a few little bugs to kind of work out with this.
Yeah, there we go. I was giving a competing stream, so now I quit that.
Okay. I'm linking everything I mentioned in the live chat for anyone who wants to join in. Stream. Let me just pull your system up again, Chris. I'll do it in the browser so we don't lose your audio.
I see Derek Daughtry, and again, the live chat is a bit out of sync from what we're actually seeing here. Brought up the thing about what the libs do, the low impedance bus boards. As part of my test, I found that just throwing capacitors onto a bus board does not eliminate noise. In some points, it creates a resonant filter that increases the noise. The logic that went behind the lib, he actually used transmission line theory based on server farms and the power for that to really see how to damp down all the noise. A real challenge with a lot of the parts in our modules is discrete chips. Discrete part modules have no noise filtering whatsoever. Analog modules that use chips try to filter out 50 or 60 hertz, but switching power supply noise is way above that, so they can't knock that down. And that's why you either ultimately want to move to a linear power supply or to a system that drains all that noise away from the modules and puts it onto the ground. And that's what the libs in particular excel at. Heavy copper bus boards help quite a bit. And I just found the lib took it to the next level. Like I said, it was painful to spend that much money on that many expensive bus boards, but it was the best, and I didn't want to do this again.
Yeah, fair answer. Let me pull the modular grid back up. Sorry, I was messing around there, not realizing which screen was streaming. I've no real judgment from me, because I want to see how it comes together and how you start to patch this thing. There is one module, the sample and hold, that I would absolutely swap out in the very near future when said announcements can maybe be made. And
that module has been swapped out of another case in anticipation of that module.
I'm going to say no more on that. Make of that what you will. Everyone else, I don't know the architect well enough. But you're playing the quantizing with a tip top. It looks like you've got every angle of performing and sequencing, or performing with the sequencers, covered.
And you can really see my one of everything approach here is, rather than creating a suite of one specialization, I was interested in, give me something different, give me something different, give me something different. That's the rule of this case, is for a module to go in, it has to give me something different as opposed to just do what 3 other modules are already doing.
Yeah.
And what really impressed me is Alex Anderson, sometimes known as Nasty Nachos.
Yeah.
Uses an architect heavily for a lot of the melodic parts of his gigs.
Yeah.
But I'll share a secret. I did not conceive this case first time. If you were on my true modular grid for this case, this is version 19.
Yeah. Continual modular Tetris to get to that
so
result.
A lot of what I've been talking about today is not like, oh, this was obvious. It's like, no, this was hard learned after going through many iterations of this case over the last few years. And actually, there's a live webcast modular rig rundown with myself and Ben, his first rig rundown, that shows where the case was a few years ago.
Yeah, you originally got the case, different sides, just straight from ADDAC systems, just as is, and it was filled up differently. That's a good video that I will go find. That's a good one to share. I enjoyed just scanning back through that and seeing where the actual system started.
Yeah.
Rundown, Chris Meyer.
I think in the meantime, Chris, also the approach we had in Patch and Tweak about, showing different modules that could basically do the same, but that had different variations. It seems like that's your approach also, like checking out different variations and then selecting what fits your purpose.
You're very right there. The devil is in the details. There's 300, 400, 500 some odd VCA modules available, but some of them do things different than other modules do. Just to take one example, we were talking about branches earlier. Branches is an exceptional module, but the LATIC probability skipper had a couple other variations on that I find useful in live performance, like a holdout. It has 2 channels, so if a trigger is going out 1, it has the ability to say that blocks it going out the second channel. And I've been using that a lot for, like, if I have simple techno kick and snare patterns, a 4/4 kick, 16th notes on the hi-hats, rather than the hi-hat going and stepping on the kick. By using the holdout in the probability skipper, it says whenever there's a kick, don't play the hi-hat. And just that space and variation, that's what I'm looking for, is those things that can take music or the patches or the sounds you're making to a different level. And that's what I'm looking for in modules.
Okay, I'm going to ping some questions from the chat. Richard in the chat has asked, saying his main criticism is the power, just the safety of the thing. Open bus bars, open mains. And I said, what would you do to improve this or get around it? Richard said not to use exposed bus bars, which, of course, a piece of metal bar carrying a voltage isn't necessarily the safest thing around. There's got to be a clear advantage to those. I've seen them mentioned in kind of more high-end power rigs several times over the years. And let's be honest, it's rare a system like this comes up, powered this way, thought out this way over many years, built to such a size in that kind of system. So why the bus bars? Let's kind of drill down on that if we can.
Yeah. The bus bars have lower resistance than any wire you're going to run.
Okay.
And the longer you run a wire, the more resistance you're going to get along that wire. In a system this big, it's 1 meter by 1 meter, or more than 3 feet by 3 feet. If I was to run from a central power supply out to all of those bus boards, I would have some long cable runs and I would have some resistance, and that would increase the noise. By running bus bars down the backbone, it's this huge hunk of metal rather than strands inside this wire. It lowers the resistance for me to get the power up closer to those bus boards. And yes, it's dangerous, but I turn the power off when I'm inside it. And when it's done, all that's going to be covered with modules. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's going to be exposed for me to, walk into accidentally while I'm playing. There are some things where the AC I'm going to cover up once I know that everything's stable and everything's working, because this is still in beta. I'm bringing this system up, and something's going to not work, and I have to get in and change it. But after that, I'm going to go ahead and dress up what I need to do. But I do already have plastic covers over the AC mains distribution coming in, so I can't touch that accidentally. And there's a few other places where I've really tried to do some cover-ups. And I appreciate your concern for my safety. I honestly do. And I am scared to death of being electrocuted. I really am.
Yeah, I saw it.
As a sound man, I was once plugging in power. Actually, it was a mic cable from the bassist amp to the mixer in a really dodgy club. And they had live and neutral flipped on one of the outlets in the club. I started to talk about that. And when I punched them together, the spark was so big, I started bleeding. That's how severe a jolt I got out of it.
Yep.
So I am concerned about that. I'm not lackadaisical, and I know a lot of people see those exposed bus bars. They are just plus and minus 12. That's not the mains. It is a lot of amperage. Everything is well grounded in there. So it's not child safe, but by the time I have all the modules installed, and I do close up all my gaps with blank modules, it'll be safe.
Mm-hmm. Just to keep the questions coming, do keep firing them in, people that are watching live. Manuel asks, why have you chosen multiple power supply instead of one big one? Of course, answer this, Chris, but for those watching now that came in late, do skip back when this just lives on YouTube. I'll put a note right in the title to skip right past all the technical issues that we had, because no one needs to sit through that, right to where we got started. And we did start with power, but if you want to take the question, Chris, why multiple supplies instead of one?
That is one big power system. That is one big power supply. In any modular, you're going to need plus and minus 12 at the least, and in some cases plus 5. There's some supplies that give you those on terminals inside one box. There's boards like the IntelliGel power boards that will take just one in, like plus 15, and convert it to plus or minus 12. But in this case, I needed so much current that it became illogical to find one case that had both plus and minus 12 and had enough amperage to power that entire case. So it was actually John Lofink who came up with the suggestion of, why don't you split them off, go unbalanced, have one lump just for the minus 12, one lump just for the plus 12. And by the way, I need a lot more amperage on plus 12 than minus 12, so I can right size the power supplies for those two different buses. And that ended up saving me money and made a cleaner layout inside. The way the ADDAC was originally designed is it's a Siamese with two independent power systems on the left side and right side. And I was originally replicating that, but I actually have one power supply in there now. You're just seeing two lumps, one for each plus or minus 12.
Mm-hmm. A wild, as if by magic, when I hinted at something earlier, a wild SSF appears, and Andrew Morelli from Steady State Fit. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Wildly appears in the chat. DB Powell and David, again, facilitator of some amazing performance spaces up Mount Rainier in Washington. I'll get the video together for that soon. But he asked, or rather kind of commented, that there's not much hands-on performance around the quantizing, especially with that being something that we spoke about. Do you find yourself playing the buttons on the tip-top module, or are you playing... Because you can button in and out notes on the architect, right?
Yes, you can change the note density, etc. on the architect, and there's a button for each note on the tip-top as well. I've not had a chance to go as far down that road as I want to, but that was certainly a reason on why I got the tip-top, the reason that I've got the architect, and for that matter, the reason I have marbles, because there's that dial that also changes how many notes are going to be fed, out the quantizer. And Ben, I loved your example of how you played the quantizer in your performance.
Yeah, it's totally key to just generally how I tend to approach keyboard instruments, and not being a keyboard player. I tend to fall into certain ways of working, and I look at a quantizer very much the same way, not physically playing it on and off, although some of them you can. I think there are better modules for that if you want to play it in that way, but turning them on and off while sequences then play through them is definitely a favourite way to use quantizing.
I have a question, Chris, in terms of playing.
I was going to ask him, actually, because you actually do some really lovely long sets. I was curious about your scheme for note selection, etc. But go ahead and ask as well.
Okay. My question, because what I work with myself is also expression. That's what I'm trying to work on, having as many expressive possibilities per note as possible. And I was just wondering if you've been looking into the polyend stuff or, the MPE stuff and just thought, well, nah, that's not for me, or how have you approached that? You're using the Korg tactile controller, but what's your considerations been towards more expressive controllers, so to say?
I don't think I'm a good enough performer at this point in terms of my tactile ability to play notes to get out of an MPE controller, the reason it exists. So I think they're fascinating, things like the Linstrument, Raleigh, et cetera, Haken. I don't think I'm a good enough physical performer to take advantage of what that instrument offers. And polyend, I know a lot of people love the polyend. It's very graphical, and I love that look of it. Polyend might be an option. I haven't looked at closely for the studio. In the case of the gigging case, a lot of my live performance is based on what can I get into carry on an airplane. And that leaves out a lot of stuff like the polyend.
That's why I like the Manta Snyder, the Snyderphonics Manta, which I use, because it's basically the same form factor as a computer or an iPad. You can squeeze it into your backpack.
And Ben, I'm sorry I keep dropping out. Just feel free to just keep my live feed off. I'll just keep talking.
If that's just drop out, it's okay. More questions. There were some more as we went through. A nice one for you here, Chris. Again, this is something I aim to really kind of tackle at some point this year. We have a nice solution that does a lot more than that. But any recommendations for a stereo VCA with a single CV channel controlling both?
I've not looked in. Well, okay. I'll take that back. Happy Nerding 3X VCA. It has a really nice system for cascading down audio and CV. So that's one option. I haven't looked so much at... see, my mind is so much in a different place. So that's one solution. I happen to also use the erogenous tone VC8 because it also has a lot of intelligent grouping and normaling. But I'm focusing much more on having monophonic stuff that I'm panning around and positioning in stereo field, or having modules that have stereo outputs already on them. I haven't had a need so much to do as a patch stereo channel throughout. I expect I'm going to be exploring that a lot more because there's some filters I have, like the Rossum Linnaeus, that are stereo. So I'll probably be starting to exploit that more, but I haven't really played with stereo VCAs. But Ben, what have you seen in terms of one CV and stereo VCAs?
There's the new Wrong Electronics one set to come that, virus delayed production on that, I think, but probably would have been ready for Super Booth or just before. He's got I think it's a Parallax, is it? One of them is a stereo filter and a stereo VCA, which looks very good. The Voicas, I believe how you say it, VOICAS, has a multiple VCA that has 2 stereo channels at the top and then a series of mono channels underneath. So very much like the banks of quad 6/8 VCAs you get, but specifically 2 stereo ones, which is useful. That's cool. I tend to just split cables down into multiple mono VCAs. Reason being, I can offset them and change the CV depth differently, so I can create the stereo image at that point in a patch if I don't already have one.
Yeah, I'm using these a lot.
The Doppio
Doppio's cables. I love these for modulation because I just pulled it from my video case to the right here where I was writing up the 4MS spherical waveform navigator, which has stereo outputs. And this is how I was controlling my IntelliGel micro VCA was, one envelope, left and right channel.
Knobs and Strings asked, says still waiting for Oct. So am I. I would love to say thank you for everyone that supported Oct and that wants to support Oct. It was really amazing. We did, no need to get into numbers, of course, but a much bigger run than we thought we would need, and it was really wildly supported, which is really amazing for me and Instruage. Really blown away by that. The virus and Chinese New Year as well, which does throw a bit of a spanner in production for a couple of weeks, has really thrown that. But Oct should be back in a few weeks. I'll be sure to put up videos and start to shout about it, but they won't disappear. There'll be a good steady stream once they do come back for anyone wanting Oct. Any more questions from anyone in the chat? I'm scrolling down the chat. Someone says, remember when Heimbach shocked himself with some test equipment or something and it was really scary shit? Alpha Stare, yes, God, and it's in the video. He left it in as a point of safety to kind of, but the look on his face when he did it, yeah, be careful. I saw a chef in a restaurant I used to work in. I really shouldn't laugh, but literally get thrown around across a room from a poorly wired meat slicer, I think it was. It's horrible when it happens, or to see it or to witness it. So yeah, God, the look on Paul Heimbach's face, I do remember that.
Yeah, I had that episode also when I was in college working at the radio station, and we got donated a bunch of vintage tube gear, and the grounding on that stuff was really dodgy. And I said, oh, this might make a fun bass amp, and I got a nasty shock out of trying to use that as well. It's just, yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get to see all the prep work. I wore these all the time when I was working on the system.
Mm.
Yeah.
Richard's really kind of, I think, concerned over your safety, or just that the resistance is minimal and maybe not needed. There's quite a bit of chat in the live chat. It's maybe something to dive into another time. A question to have.
I can tell you categorically that reducing the resistance will reduce the noise in your system. That's why I've put that above other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Experience seems to suggest, not by personal experience, but from other people with large systems, it seems to be a very big step forward.
And you mentioned Patreon. I mean, even just different bus boards, single bus boards, same length, 16 inches, half a meter, or less than half a meter. Even the difference in how much copper they use or how wide the traces are made a difference in the noise in a 2-row by 84 HP system. So yes, I'm fanatical about reducing resistance.
Yeah, someone else said they're looking forward to the return of the Oct. If we can all just sing that to the tune of Return of the Mac, I'd be very happy about that.
Go place pre-orders. It always kills me when people say, it was out of stock, and then it was back in stock and I missed it. I'm like, place pre-orders. That's why I've got things like, a natural gate and things like that. Is I sat out the pre-order wait so I could have one.
Yeah, there is an increasing, well, we're all just freely talking, there's an increasingly awkward tone with some people that get in touch about Oct availability, that they've been waiting for 4 months. It's like, well, did you tell us, Thor, that you want one? Did you order it? Did you pre-order it? Once they started flying, they did go out. New stock went out around the world every week for a good few weeks. It wasn't literally all went out for the 18th of December and nothing else. There was a kind of steady thing. they of course sold, which is great, but yeah, do make some effort with the stores. Build a relationship with a good local store. That's absolutely the way to do things. Is to, and by doing that, not just messaging them asking for things, but support them, buy things from there. They'll help you if you help them, kind of thing, especially at the moment, the kind of times we're going through. The good independent modular stores make a big difference, I think, to the scene. DB Powell asked, you used to be a big proponent of Rossum's Morpheus, but he doesn't see it in the case. What happened?
I think Morpheus is very cool. I have more modules than I have room. So some have to get cut. And at the end of the day, I wasn't using Morpheus as much as some other things I was playing with. So right now it's out of the case. I don't have room to put everything in there, and I am stubbornly resisting getting a second case. I'm trying to say, that's it. That's the studio instrument. And I'm going to choose the modules that closest fit my aesthetic to put into that case. Morpheus is amazing. I don't do that much music that takes advantage of its strength, so something else went into its place. It's the same thing with like a Frap Tools Fumana. Fantastic piece of gear. Takes up a lot of space, and I'm not doing a lot of stuff that takes advantage of it. So right now, it's out of the case.
Oh, God, I love Fumana. Let's not go down that one, because Peter Brown has asked how much longer we're going today, or are we just going to keep going until Saturday? Yeah, Fumana, tons of effects before it, so what goes into it is already really wet, and then tons of effects on the way out, because you can carve so much space into that harmonic spectrum with it. God, Octon the Fumana, now there's a pairing.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, lots of CV on different channels. Taking stuff out, everyone puts stuff in, and not enough people focus on taking stuff out.
I like pulling the sliders down. I like it to be off and to be able to pull and occasionally have some bands on and pull them down. But yeah, just flipping that way of working rather than adding, look at what you can subtract. I know Richard Devine tends to perform that way. It's about once something's built and there's an initial patch, it's about subtracting things down into subsets of themselves, using lots of probability and filtering to bring things in and out.
It's a great design principle, actually. It's used in visual design too. Mm-hmm. You know when you're done, when there's nothing left to take away.
I saw that quote. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, Robin Rimbaud likes to say as well, Scanner, that you should make the statement you want to make in as few words as possible, which is the same thing for the design, but in as few moves as possible, as few notes as possible, in as few layers as possible. Something to apply to music. If there's a statement you're trying to make, say it as efficiently as you can. And it's an interesting way to work, 'cause I feel I certainly don't always work that way. It's an interesting practice.
I'm a big fan of dynamics. I like, that to being a place you can go to and come back to. But I guess because I have a very low boredom threshold, is quite often when I listen to things, I go, okay, I got that. What else? And I don't want people to be bored listening to what I do. So I try to always say, okay, it's gone on for a couple measures now. Let's introduce a change. And I may be adding and maybe subtracting. So a lot of my aesthetic is, how can I keep evolving something? And that includes building up, subtracting back down.
Absolutely. I've just put a kind of call out. We are a bit delayed, as we said earlier, so
yeah, we should do a final call here, because eventually I need to screw those into the case, if nothing else.
And a drink and a toilet break, I would imagine, for us all. But yeah, final call for questions. We will move on to sound generation next time. Do take a look at, I will drop the link in the case, drop the link in the live chat rather. This is the setup, and we're moving up the left-hand side into sound generators. 7:30 p.m. UK time again on Saturday. I will also be streaming on Friday with a new module, which you can see is covered by a bit of paper. You can guess what that might be, but a new video will come up Friday afternoon from me, and a stream with said brand releasing their new module on Friday, 8 p.m.
Cool.
UK. But do watch out for these streams. We're doing them Wednesday today, Saturday again, and then Wednesday, Saturday again. 4 streams, the kind of 4 corners of the case. Just last look through questions.
What 4 modules would you look to get if you're starting out?
That's a big question.
Big question. Just before that, someone said they'd love to see, as nice it is to see this monster case, the return of the free module challenge while we're in lockdown. Yeah, good point. The modular podcast thing kind of disappeared for various reasons, but it's something that will come back at some point. Been talking to Matthew Shaw about that. Free module challenge is an interesting one. Search free module challenge on YouTube if you're not sure, but 4 modules to get started. That's really tricky. It's too much of an open question. Are you trying to build a drum machine, an effects processor, a synth voice, a random signal generator for other gear? Too open. Unless
it's something that I tackle a little bit in a couple of my courses, the Moog Mother 32 course and the Eurorack expansion. And my thing is trying to set a foundation for further expansion. I think a lot of people leave out some important utilities, like just having like another mixer in their case.
Absolutely.
Utility mixer, because you may add something else, but you just can't get everything out of it because you can't attenuate the control voltages going into it or something like that. So I kind of set up a foundation of a couple more VCAs, the utility mixer, a disting, and then say, okay, now I'm ready to start adding modules.
It's also, the mixer thing's an interesting one. It's something that's in my patch for Patch and Tweak, of course, Kim and your book, Chris. Having a mixer before, say, a filter, so you can have an envelope that is event-based, a timing-based rhythmic thing, something loose and drifting, usually an LFO, and something random, and you can blend how much that affects the filter. And it makes a massive difference. Rather than feeling like you need another sound processor, it might be that actually making the things you've got moving more interesting ways is the key to unlocking kind of the next level in your patching. Mixers are absolutely unsung heroes of a system.
Definitely. Maybe I can add, what I'm trying to do is always to squeeze in mixers everywhere I can. Also as part, like the Roland 521, I think it is, like a 6-input mixer basically, also with filters, the dual filter. So if you can have the mixing thing as a part of another module, like VCAs that are normal and stuff like that, I think that helps a lot to save space or, buying fewer modules.
Frank in the live chat's asked about how overkill the power is in the case. I'll put a timestamp on the video. We've been through power a couple of times if you joined late. So if you watch this back on YouTube after it's live, maybe tomorrow because I'll be going to bed, unless someone else wants to give you a timestamp right now, we'll put in...
I'll give a short answer to it.
Yeah.
I tried to use the conventional wisdom of 15 to 20% headroom, and I found out that was not enough, because between all the capacitors on the bus boards, which need more power when you start it up, and all the capacitors on certain modules, which had nicer filtering, also needing power when it started up, even 15 to 20% margin was not enough, and my power supplies were shutting down. So in this case, I basically doubled what Modular Grid said, not because you need that much, but because I didn't want to do this again.
I'm just dishing out thank yous in the chat, to the chat,
Yeah.
of course, to Chris for your time and your idea of doing this, to Kim as well. Sorry,
Hey, thank you guys.
Kim was largely silent because we thought it was purely his issue with the echo early on.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
I'm curious to hear what that was when we're done here.
Yeah, some people were like, man, I'm out. There were so many people jumping ship, and I was like, oh, God, what have we got ourselves into? And then someone, it was when Smoozer, I think the channel name was, said, this is sampling gold. I was like, at least we're giving him something.
Yeah.
But yeah, we figured that. We'll figure out me getting back into mono instead of just being on the left. And I think other than that, we're fairly good, other than a couple of odd bits. So yeah, leave any comments on the video if people want to, because we can't keep going forever on this. But we'll watch the comments before. We'll see those modules plugged in. Check in with where you've got to. And Saturday at 7:30 p.m, if you check bit.ly/Corona streams, I'll be sure to put the link up there to the specific chat, specific stream, and see everyone then. Any final words from either of you? Do go check out the book, the preview of the books that Kim has online.
Yeah, please do. I'll post the link again.
Yeah. It's a hell of a lot for a preview of Patch and Tweak, Push Turn Move, and Pedal Crush. Patch and Tweak's great. My only criticism of you both is it's a little bit heavy to just throw in the bag when I'm traveling. When you just want to just touch up on a little read here and there, it's just a bit too big. It is how I usually travel when I've got cameras and things. But no, it's great.
We know.
Okay, great. Let's call it a day there. Thanks for everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I'm glad we got through today's modules, and I hope that it gives you a taste for what the additional episodes are going to be like. Is, a lot of thought goes into this stuff, and I'm happy to share.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care.